meeting of the work session of the Board of County Commissioners to May 18th, 2021 to order. This work session may be viewed in person by in the Board of County Commission chambers, on SGTV, on YouTube, or by registering to participate in the Zoom webinar. Residents can provide public comment in person or by registering to speak on the Seminole County website or the Board of County Commissioners webpage. There you will find a link to register for the webinar entitled Meetings/Webinars, Webinar Registration and Helpful Hints. If you are unable to join via a computer or online, interested parties should call 407-665-0808 for additional information on how to participate via a telephone. We will take public comment on each item as it appears on the agenda. In order to be recognized to speak, you will, and you are using a computer or iPad, you will need to use the raise hand feature, or if calling in on telephone, you will need to press *9. Please adhere to the CDC guidelines and silence all cell phones and electronic devices, as I am doing right now, so that we're all on the same page. We are holding today a second budget work session for the 21-22 fiscal year. Sheriff Lima will present his proposed 21-22 budget. Following the sheriff, the staff will provide a budget overview, fund forecast, and have a discussion regarding reserves to assist us with developing a 21-22 fiscal budget. The Environmental Services Department will present for their 21-22 budget this afternoon, and the last item on the agenda will be a workshop on impact fees. If you guys are having a hard time hearing me, I'm sorry. I've had a frog in my throat since Friday. I don't know why, but I will do my very best to project. And with that, Sheriff Lima, welcome, and you are on, sir.
Well, thank you so much, Chairman, Commissioners. It's great to see you again. Great to see the other half of your faces as well. Joining with me today is our Chief of Administrative Services, Lisa Spriggs, as you all know very well, and then our Chief Financial Officer, Mary Hope, who will be part of this presentation. What I'll do is I'll kind of go through slides, and we have the control of the slides here. One of the things that I always like to really highlight here in Seminole County is our philosophy and our mission statement, which has been to enhance the quality of life by reducing crime and the fear of crime throughout Seminole County. And one of the things that I spend a significant time talking about, as well as our members, is the fear of crime is something that is much more prevalent than crime itself, and we'll support that with some empirical data as we kind of go through our presentation here. When we've worked on this, it's important that we remain as lean as possible, and I think I've shared with each of you over the past 5 years when I've had the opportunity to present our overall Sheriff's Office budget that we're really trying to focus on addressing issues on the front end so they don't become larger issues in our community, because we know the cost of incarceration and rehabilitation and all of those services are incredibly expensive. So every time that we show greater success with addressing mental health and substance abuse and poor parenting, it ultimately saves us money on the tail end. Over the past 5 years or so, I think that we've come in with a relatively modest budget of an average of 4% request each year of the 5 years, average of 4%. This year it's 3.5%, when the ad valorem increase is on average about 7%. So we're right at that halfway mark of what we feel is necessary to operate. This last year has been incredibly difficult for public safety, not only law enforcement, but as you know, fire and everyone else with COVID and COVID conditions. And we found ourselves in the unique position to have more than 300 of our members working remotely. Many of them worked remotely for over a year, and I tell you, I think it's an incredibly effective way to save money and increase productivity. I know individually I've shared, some of these thoughts and conversations that, some of the people that have gone to a more remote working environment, I don't know that it will ever come back. And it's great that government is now identifying and embracing what the private sector has learned for a long time is we spend a lot of money on brick and mortar when we don't necessarily need to do that. We also have had some unique challenges with COVID, particularly with our correctional facility and our communication center, where they did not have the same luxuries of socially distancing and not coming into work. And as a result of that, we lost one of our sergeants to a COVID-related situation, James LaRue, who was a great man, a father, a husband, and an American hero serving his country in the United States Marine Corps and then serving his community here at the Sheriff's Office. So we mourn, his loss as we do that. But I'm incredibly proud of our workforce as they worked with county staff, Alan Harris and Donna Walsh and Dr. Todd Husty, done a remarkable job coming together, and I'm very proud of the work that we've done. The budget transmittal letter is there. I won't read it. It's 3 pages long. Each one of you had received that. It gives kind of a global overview of what we're doing, what we've asked for, with the conclusion, just the formal request to each of the commissioners on what our next budget is. Every year we have this presentation. I always talk about the report card. I would suggest that the report card constantly changes when it comes to the expectations that we have of our law enforcement professionals and actually criminal justice professionals. I don't know that law enforcement really does great service to what we're doing day in and day out, because our team is doing a lot more than just enforcing the law. But this slide indicates the report card. And the report card has a direct effect on the quality of life of citizens. It has a direct correlation to property values, whether or not businesses want to move into Seminole County. And it's 7 categories of crime that have been tracked for more than 100 years. It's murder, rape, robbery, ag assault, motor vehicle thefts, larceny, parts and no parts from vehicles. This is sometimes referred to as index crime. And those 7 categories of crime have been determined because of 2 reasons. One, it has a direct correlation on the quality of life of the citizens, as well as its reliability in reporting, meaning that there's victims that will typically report those particular situations. As you can see, as Seminole County continues to grow, again, the 3rd most densely populated county in the state of Florida per square mile, you can see that the crime rate in Seminole County has never been lower than it is today. And that statement has held true for the past 5 years. A lot of times people will say, well, you've got the lowest crime rate because a lot of businesses and situations were shut down. Well, that's not the case. I mean, it's been a constant trend over the last 5 years. We've had the lowest crime rate in Seminole County's history, 78% decrease over the past 35 years, and 63% decrease in the past 20 years, while our population over that same 20-year window has increased by 26%. And let's face it, criminals have found new ways to victimize people with the internet and other types of things. With that said, enough patting what we do on the back, because the success of any jurisdiction comes not only at the effort and work of the law enforcement agency, but largely through the collaboration of vested partners and law-abiding community members. One of the statements that I continue to say, and I have to say this because sometimes people will say, well, if you got the lowest crime rate in history, can't you just lay people off and not have as many workforce that's there? And somebody who is the untrained eye has a legitimate question when they ask that. The fact is a majority of crime that occurs in our community is actually never reported to law enforcement. Criminologists suggest that it's approximately 10% of crime that occurs in our community is actually ever reported to law enforcement. If those numbers sound alarming or you're doubtful of those numbers, just think about the amount of victimization that occurs every single day that goes unreported and undetected. How many nonverbal victims of child abuse, neglect, or abandonment occur, but they don't have the opportunity to report that victimization. How many, largely female victims, but how many victims of domestic violence occur every single day, but yet feel that there's not enough resources, or there's not enough community support or family support to step out and talk about their victimization. Lastly, how many people get behind the wheel of a car tonight in Seminole County on a Tuesday night and will drive above the legal limit of intoxication, but yet never be stopped and never be detected? I think it's the responsibility of modern law enforcement agencies to look beyond the numbers and to do those things. As we talk about crime rate, I think the bigger challenges that we have, and one that all of you know so well because you've partnered with us and many other vested interest partners, is to combat this unprecedented opioid addiction. Last year in Seminole County alone, we had 748 overdoses in Seminole County. A very affluent county, great school system, wonderful quality of life. Nearly 750 people overdosed. Sadly, 109 people overdosed in 2020. Last year, 109 of our citizens overdosed, while firefighters and police officers deployed naloxone more than 650 times in this county. Or another way to say that, public safety professionals brought more than 650 people back to life with use of drugs that they carry on their rescue vehicles or emergency duty belts. Sadly, those numbers have increased. As of yesterday morning, there's a 37% increase in overdoses, a 36% increase in overdose deaths on top of those numbers that I just relayed to you, which means since January 1st, 310 overdoses in Seminole County and 45 overdose deaths. We're on record right now to have a historic, unprecedented year once again when it comes to this, while we have all types of partnerships and treatment that you've allowed us to have. The hard work needs to be done. An unintended consequence of COVID-19, and we've been talking about this from the beginning, is people have turned to their substance of choice at a greater number than ever before. We knew that this was a hazard going in. We knew that recovery is very much a social type of experience where people are going in and they're sometimes seeing people. Sometimes they say that they're clean and they're good. It's not until somebody actually sees them and says, "You don't look good." And another thing that we're working on right now is not only the turn towards substance abuse, but dependency on mental health services is higher than ever before. The most recent report on Baker Acts, 2020 Baker Acts, is 2,160 Baker Acts in Seminole County. And again, a Baker Act is the involuntary admission for mental health evaluation. What is occurring not only in our county but across the nation is people in many cases misuse the Baker Act. The reason why people are involuntarily taken and then ultimately released sometimes within hours, the reason why some people in our county are Baker Acted more than 5 or 6 times per month is because the Baker Act was never intended to take a lot of the people. Baker Act is for people who are suicidal or homicidal and the most severe cases of that. And what's happening now is I think that a lot of times people are interpreting the law and stretching it as far as they can to get people introduced into a system where they feel like they can receive some help. Baker Acts this year have increased by 144 and 55 additional Baker Acts with our youth. And I want to emphasize the youth increase of 55. That's when 100% of the school kids were not actually going to school. A lot of times the Baker Acts occur in the school system because a teacher, a guidance counselor, a social worker has a mandatory obligation to report what they feel is abuse, neglect, or abandonment, and those numbers are just skyrocketing. The good news is part of our request this year is to do something more comprehensive with mental health. A lot of people are surprised to learn that mental health actually was changed through advocacy here from Seminole County with Sheriff Don Esslinger and Linda Gregory, who was the widow of Deputy Gene Gregory, who was killed in the line of duty by somebody who was off his medication and not properly treated out in Geneva. We know that when people take their medicine, they can lead relatively normal lives. When they don't have their medicine, they don't do that. They become dangerous to themselves and other citizens, and sometimes those citizens are first responders. So what they did was they changed the Florida's Baker Act law. They allowed for court-ordered assisted outpatient treatment right here, changed the Baker Act law. The only problem was the legislature never properly funded it, and Seminole County was the only agency that ever implemented any cause for action. So you've allowed us to do the Hope and Healing Center, which has been incredibly generous from Advent Health and Tim Cook, and they have gone all in with you and us and other caregivers to really provide critical services regardless of level of coverage, whether you're uninsured or underinsured. We view the same model going down the path for mental health, and I'll spend a little bit of time talking about what that looks like. A little bit of the financial offset for the Hope and Healing Center, as each of you know, but I share largely for the opportunity to memorialize this for anyone who may be watching and viewing back, is Advent Health goes in about $1.5 million a year to the building that you have provided them. That's complete, clinical coverage to support that. We had an appropriation last year from the governor, who signed in $400,000 to support that. Another appropriation now this year. We're optimistic that the governor will sign this again, another $400,000 appropriation. Walmart, which is very, very unique, this public-private partnership that we have with them, have now gone in $750,000 to support the Hope and Healing Center. And then we have a lingering request from Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy on a federal request for $400,000. So we do all of that when the Rotaries and the Leadership Seminole are all rallying behind and trying to continue to raise money for this very, very wonderful cause that will ultimately save people's lives. That concept has worked, and we've asked some of our partners, Orlando Health and Aspire Healthcare, to do the same creation of a crisis stabilization center for people who are in mental health crisis, allowing us a one-stop shop to take people, preferably at a county building that is already existing. If not, some of our partners are looking at potentially building a location. Up until this point, many people who are on their journey for recovery have found it a need to also seek mental health services. And in many cases, they do that in separate venues and separate opportunities. What we want to do here is combine that all, and some of our requests as we get into the numbers will afford us the ability to do that. That will pave the path to having a more comprehensive approach and strategy to address homelessness in Seminole County. We have nearly 40 camps in Seminole County. 19 of those camps are active, but I think that as we collectively know and spoke about before, homelessness extends beyond the argument of professional panhandlers versus people who are living in the camps, and also includes the working poor, people who are living on other individuals' couches. They're not able to afford steady, reliable housing, and then ultimately end up in motels and hotels for a week at a time. So we're going to be doing a lot of work with that. This year, we've done a lot of work with our DOJ grant, which was a mobile juvenile crisis. They would go out in the community and provide specific services, like a hospital van that would go out directly into the neighborhoods and sometimes follow up with in-office visits for our youth. There was about $325,000 per year that allowed us to support that, and we are sunsetting that grant opportunity now. So part of our request will include that. And of course, I've got a meeting with the mayors and managers, I think Thursday of this week, trying to outline some of the things that I will talk about and we will talk about this morning as far as our global responsibility and the services that we provide to our citizens, because we have a collective interest there as we do that. Our agency priorities, and I'm very thankful that you've allowed us to gradually kind of chip away. I think over the past 5 years or so, you've afforded us the ability to address for compression, which is a very, very big deal. And I think our strategy was to kind of slowly chip away at compression and come up with a kind of common sense strategy, and then make sure that we're continuing to work towards market value. I think all of us know that that's not something that occurs overnight. And in the interest of our public, we have to kind of chip away slow at it. We're still doing that. As you see this slide, my internal agency priorities is, in random order here, is pay and compensation. And again, you've been very, very generous to allow us to kind of work on that gradually each year. Staffing, I'm very proud to see that when law enforcement agencies across the country are constantly finding a struggle to find dedicated, professionally trained law enforcement officers to join their agencies, we don't have a problem with that. Quite frankly, we have people that are leaving Seattle's and Atlanta's and New York to come down here and work in the state of Florida, but particularly Seminole County. And I think that that's largely because of the community that we serve day in and day out. We're incredibly blessed to have a community that appreciates their first responders, their law enforcement officers, firefighters, military personnel, and that's what attracts a lot of people here to Seminole County. Again, leadership, growing and continuing to develop leaders within career development, professional development. We've got such wonderful partnerships with various vendors, and they're always here. Quite literally, we have a training going on right now with 80 law enforcement officers from across the country that are in our Sanford Training Center right now. It's Axon, the maker of Taser, that's providing this state-of-the-art training there. So we'll continue to move forward with that, and of course our equipment and technology. The equipment that you've allowed us to have and equipped us with has allowed for greater levels of transparency, and quite literally allows us to save lives and law enforcement officers and citizens' lives with that. Our community investments is also our priority, and that's to address those most pressing issues. We've always felt that crime is a symptom of a larger problem, and opioid use disorder, mental health, substance abuse, all of the things that we've experienced through the pandemic are things that we will continue to focus on as we move forward.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm just going to touch on
Lisa, before I, excuse me, I just want to say, if anybody, when we get a broader shot, Commissioner Herr had a previous engagement, conflict. She'll be here at 10:30, but she also said that she'll be watching this afterwards on tape. So I just wanted everybody to know that. And the mayor's and manager's meeting is tomorrow, Sheriff. I just want to make sure that we can vote. Yeah, so go ahead. Lisa, please. I'm sorry for the interruption.
Oh, no problem at all. And feel free as I go through. I'm going to do a very top level on our numbers. You have our document. We've been able to talk with each of you one-on-one. You can follow up with questions after this, but please feel free to ask questions while I'm going through this. Again, I'm going to hit it very top level. This is a summary of the sheriff's proposed budget. This is what I'll call our almost all-in budget. The first column is our certified budget. What the certified budget represents is the sheriff's statutory obligation to submit to you under Statute 30 each year the budget that is required to fund his core services and functions. What that budget does not include, the presentation here is net, so it represents what we are requesting to draw from the county's general fund. It does not include such revenues as our partnerships with the Seminole County School Board, with our city partners, for our dispatch contracts, and for our school resource deputies. So I just want to make sure that you know that that's not included in that number. And that's approximately another $6 million that we work off of and obviously record in our financials. The special revenue fund column, we'll talk about in a little bit more detail, a little over $9 million. The majority of that is representative of our Child Protective Services contract with DCF. And then finally, the last column is our BCC facilities. Under statute, we, as a constitutional officer, as you know, are not allowed to own buildings. And what this represents is our request for the services that we handled related to county buildings. And that has been a great partnership. And I'll go into a little bit more detail. That number, the $2,975,000, has remained flat for the last 5 years.
The 5-year budget, looking at it, and I think it's good to give kind of a historical perspective, is each year you've come in and we've tried to repurpose positions that we have. Every time somebody retires, we look and evaluate whether or not there's a need to retain that position. And I think that, it takes a little bit of time to kind of offset the cost from the tail end to the front end. And I think that every time we are more successful with preventing people from going down the path, there's an expectation that we will peel off resources and services on the tail end. As an example, if the incarceration rates ultimately decrease, that means there's less meals that you have to pay, less claims that you have to have with medical services and all of that. So we constantly try to do that. We also look at civilianizing our agency, and we'll kind of get a breakdown here in a moment of our workforce and our numbers, but this makes five budgets that we've submitted not requesting any additional FTEs or positions for the sheriff's office, but rather we've repurposed positions to support SCORE and the opioid work we're doing. If you think about it, 5 years ago, we weren't doing any of the opioid work we're doing in these partnerships, but those positions are all repurposed position. And if you look at over the past 10 years, a lot of the positions that we've added over the past 10 years were cost-neutral positions to move towards consolidated dispatch, or the expectation through the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act to have a dedicated professionally trained law enforcement officer on each campus. And of course, over the past 10 years, we've also had the transition from the BCC to the sheriff's office on county probations, which I think is working wonderfully well when you connect all of the dots of what's going on. This is a breakdown of our workforce. It's 1,442 all in. I think that a lot of times people, when they see this number, they're surprised to see that the largest amount of workforce that we have are actually civilian members of the agency. I think that a law enforcement agency, particularly the sheriff's office, is most visibly known for people who drive green and white cars with blue lights on the top or wear a uniform like I'm wearing now, but an overwhelming majority of the workforce are actually civilians. Not only is that a cost-effective way, the benefit package of a civilian and the requirement of a vehicle and equipment is less than a sworn law enforcement officer, but it also provides some diversity when it comes to problem solving and looking at situations. Sometimes you get a lot of correctional officers or law enforcement in the room, and we'll come up with a plan to do something, and some civilian will walk up to us and says, "Are you sure you want to do that?" So it allows for great dialogue and conversation and discussion. And of course, I'll remind the people who are watching, I know the board knows this, but Seminole County is one of 7 counties that takes on exclusive responsibility for abuse, neglect, and abandonment of children. DCF does not provide that service here in Seminole County. The members of the Seminole County Sheriff's Office does, and we had a great visit with Secretary Harris, the new secretary, and she was at our office just the other day, and the acting secretary for DJJ. So it's a great honor to have these secretaries make their rounds and come to Seminole County as a model that can be replicated across the state, if not the country.
And just a final note on that position slide is the contracts that I mentioned earlier. There's about 50 positions representative of SRDs and dispatch that are either fully funded or partially funded that are represented in that general fund column. The next slide is a general fund summary, just showing a comparison of our budget last year to the proposed budget this year. As the sheriff mentioned earlier, a 3.5% increase is requested. You can see that personnel represents the larger portion of our increase at 3.3%, and then operating expenditures at 6%. And we'll drill down a little bit further as we go further into the presentation. The next slide details our BCC facilities budget request. Since 2018, you have been very generous in allowing us to do some major projects, mainly in the correctional facility. That $2,975,000 of that is to fund those major projects. So this is the fourth year in a row that we have utilized those funds or are requesting those funds to continue to put projects in place in our correctional facility. Just to kind of go back, and we will submit to you a status of all of our projects because we have a lot of outstanding money that is currently appropriated in these project accounts. But just as a reminder, you had funded at $1.7 million our door system, control system project in the correctional facility. We're currently finalizing our jail kitchen renovation. Once that is finalized, we can move forward with the door access control system. We've done plumbing system upgrades. We've done some electrical upgrades. We're requesting some more this next year. This is also to facilitate courtroom renovations, and also, most importantly, and one of our bigger challenges in the facility is our networking. So it's to reconfigure some of the rooms so that we can have an actual network room for a lot of our equipment. Slide 13 represents general fund revenue. We provide this annually to county fiscal services. These are revenues that we manage but are included in your general fund as revenue sources. So we just detail them out and show you how those are changing each year. The one thing that I want to note on this is our federal inmate contracts. We renewed our rate in 2016. That was our last renewal. It has been 5 years. Because of COVID last year, we didn't go through the renewal process and upgrade that rate, but we will be doing that over the next year. So we do anticipate potentially bringing in more revenue within that federal inmate contract, which is the largest source. On slide 15, the special revenue funds are detailed. Again, I'll just do top level. As the sheriff mentioned, our Child Protective Services contract with DCF. The one thing that I wanted to note there is that this contract has remained flat for a period of 7 years. And, you know, again, last year was not probably the time to start having those discussions. At this time last year, we didn't know, where we would be as far as revenues in the state of Florida. And actually, DCF was asking us how would decrease look for those services. So this is an area that we're going to be talking about and looking at with DCF. It does put some pressure on our general fund budget now, because right now our contract at $4.8 million really just funds the personnel associated, which is about 60 positions full-time. The other thing that the sheriff mentioned earlier, and I want to point out here, is the BJA Implementation Youth Crisis Response. That's our mobile crisis unit. And again, that grant is expiring. This is something that we would like to continue The county manager and I have had some discussions there. We did not include that in our general fund request. However, it is in the American Rescue Fund request, so that is something to note. This page represents special revenue funds that the county controls and transfers money into our operation each year. These are predominantly flat every year and continue to be funded at that level manner.
This slide is just the formal budget certification as required by Chapter 30.49 that I have signed and submitted, indicating that this budget is reasonable and necessary for the proper and safe and effective operation of the Sheriff's Office. Our next breakdown slide is a slide that each of you see each year. It's just kind of a breakdown of where our cost and where our money goes, and you know that we're a personnel-rich agency with 85% of our overall budget going directly to the men and women that are providing services.
The next few pages are our sub-object classification, which is a line item budget based on state line items. The personal services, like I said, increased at the 3.3%. And as you can see from this slide, one of the things that allowed us to be at the 3.3% is we're very fortunate that our health insurance fund has done very well over the past few years, so we have reserves to stabilize that fund. Also, we've been fortunate that this year throughout our budget, all of our insurances, including workers' comp, and you'll see in our operating too, have not had any substantial increase. However, one of the challenges and challenge for you all as a county too is retirement contributions were raised. They were raised by 6% for both special risk and for regular class. So a little bit more increase there. In the operating area, some of our biggest challenges, as I said, is we have some pressure where we're absorbing some support costs for child protective services this year. Technology, as the sheriff mentioned earlier, is a continued growth area. However, we are doing some things, I think I mentioned this last year, in the technology area that right now we're putting money in that we feel and have looked at the analysis will really have a return on investment. So if we do some of the things we're switching over to now, down the road, it'll mitigate cost increases on into the future. Again, the top line is our insurance for liability, medical malpractice, aviation, cars. We're fortunate this year that we've had no increase on that line. That's a big spend for us. In the repair and maintenance area, it's various different areas going up. It's across both our aviation area, cars, special operations, technology. So that increase is representative of a multitude of areas. In the operating area, as you know, fuel is going to be a challenge. So we have some additional funds budgeted for the increase that we are currently experiencing and anticipate in fuel. In addition, in that area, again, the technology spend is in there and has increased. Our capital remains flat. This is the third year in a row. I know over the years we talked about getting that number up to a reasonable level where we could manage it, and Mary and her team do a great job of managing throughout each year with that $3,375,000, being able to replace a lot of our equipment and rotate it out as needed for life cycle replacement. And then finally, we have our reserve amount, the $160,000, and I will just tell you that that's going to be my go-to for fuel if it does get any more of an increase. So we're fortunate to have that. And actually, I was looking back in budgets, and I know that 160,000's been here since I've been with the county, and I think it's actually been in that same number for 20-plus years. So I don't know where the 160 came from, but it's remained flat over those years.
This is just a slide indicating that we continue to support our community foundation. I think we bring in nearly $500,000 a year to support charitable organizations and interests that we collectively feel are important. I know each of you partner with our various events when we're not in kind of a COVID environment, whether it's the Christmas Village event back or the drive-through spooktacular event that we had at the Sheriff's Office main building. It was good to partner with emergency management and the fire department and county staff to offer something to kids this year so they can drive through, and that was a remarkable success. But about $500,000 each year that comes in through that. This is where some of the Walmart money rests. Leadership Seminole has a fundraiser event. Some of it will go there, and it's really smaller contributions from various organizations and charities that help us support these activities for our citizens. Next is the slide that indicates through various icons our law enforcement accreditations.
Oh, okay.
Did we do this?
The sheriff's taking over fire.
I've got two buttons over here, and I messed it up somehow.
Does the fire chief need to be concerned here? Sure.
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you.
So a bunch of icons that may not mean a whole lot of people who are not in our business, but what it represents, and I think is incredibly important right now, is 8 different law enforcement accreditations. These are independent reviewing organizations that come in, typically every 3 years and assess our operations, look at our policies, pull our practices. They represent 2 law enforcement, 1 national and 1 state, 2 corrections, 1 national and 1 state, and then of course various other areas, our dispatch, our medical, our aviation, and then of course our forensic lab are all accredited by various organizations. To put it in perspective, Seminole County is in the top 1% of law enforcement agencies across the country when it comes to our law enforcement accreditations. And this is going to be kind of a quick overview of where our money is being spent. And I'll pause if you have any questions about these, but I'll go through these a little bit quicker if you want me to just hold this. And this is basically kind of our breakdown. First, the Office of the Sheriff consists of 10 FTEs. Our executive command has remained the same since I became sheriff back nearly 5 years ago. That indicates personnel associated with there. That's, again, the chiefs, the chief of staff, and our general counsel that's there at the office that has executive oversight of what we do. Total of 10 people. That remains the same. General Counsel Office, we have 5 total people, and as you know, we provide services countywide, whether it's risk protection orders or various civil forfeitures. We do that largely because we're great partners and we have common interests. I mean, we have the SWAT team and CCIB, and we do a lot of things in a multi-agency type of way here in Seminole County, but again, the salaries is most of that breakdown right there. I mentioned a little bit about professional development. That building that you have afforded us the opportunity to move into now several years ago has served us extremely well. We have lent that area out to other constitutional officers who may have large meetings. We've had vendors come in, and when we have vendors come in, it really is a profitable arrangement for us because they typically bring with it 5 or 6 free admissions into whatever class that they're offering there, and it serves us well. Served us extremely well during COVID when we were socially distancing and trying to keep people away from one another. But that's the breakdown of the training. I do want to talk just a little bit more about professional development, because I think that law enforcement agencies across the country largely train. And, up until this point, I think training has been perceived as a good thing, but what happens in these agencies is typically training consists of drive, fight, and shoot. And these are high liability aspects of law enforcement. I think that if they're being honest, what they're saying is they're just recertifying people and not necessarily training. We do cultural diversity training, whatever the topic of the of the day is. We're bringing folks in there and making sure that they're proficient and have a clear understanding of what we do day in and day out. Professional standards is a relatively small unit. It's 6 members, and professional standards ensures that we are adhering to those policies. There's a part of the staff there that will look at accreditation. Part of the staff handles complaints, and our complaints are at an all-time low. I mean, we very rarely have legitimate complaints, and those that we do, we treat those seriously. I mean, we get on them, we conduct a thorough and independent investigation in the best interest of our citizens, our agency, and the complainant as well. Six people that are working in that area. Public affairs has not grown at all, and I think that some of our responsibilities have grown. I think that all of you know the new outreach that we have with our Pastors Alliance, pulling our pastors and community members together to advocate and be aware of some of the things that we're working on as a county and as a sheriff's office is incredibly important. A lot of this is centered around people who are in crisis, and a lot of people who are in crisis will go to their pastors regardless of what faith it is. So I'm proud of the work that we do there. Public affairs is also an opportunity for us to work with our media relations, and if you look at some of the videos that we've put together, I'll remind you that our video team with Rick and Bob, who's a dynamic duo, we brought them over from WESH, and quite literally they both won an Emmy for some of the work that they've done in-house, which is unheard of for law enforcement, public affairs, public relations folks to win an Emmy, but our team had the opportunity to do that, and I'm very proud of what they do, sharing behind-the-scenes story and memorializing our 6 heroes that lost their lives, had their lives taken in the line of duty. Fiscal services, as you can see through this budget presentation, there's a lot that goes into the budget, a lot of moving parts that's there. Total of 21 people that are a part of that group, all civilian folks that are there, and we always think that that's the best way to do that. Building services, always working on a new development and a new project, and we work incredibly well with county staff on these things. We project and talk about these situations well in advance. I think I've shared kind of all along that I'd like to move away from the old mindset of every person who works in an agency has to have their own individual office, and sometimes I joke and I say, up until this point, people need to have I love myself walls where they can hang their plaques and certificates, and I think that we're embracing more of a kind of a shared space philosophy that you see the business community go into, where if you come in and there's an open desk and you're working on a special project or an initiative with somebody, you work next to them for 6 months, and when that project or initiative is done, you pick up your computer and you go somewhere else and you plug in somewhere else. So with as many people as we have and the various assignments, fleet is a big responsibility. Lisa talked a little bit about fuel, but that has also remained flat with 7 people servicing our fleet. And that's a breakdown of the costs associated with that. Human resources and recruitment, we have done a little bit more with effectively recruiting. I'm very proud of the folks that are coming in. I think that we're recruiting a very diverse workforce, diverse in all regards, various segments of the community, various backgrounds, people coming from the business community, private and public sectors, and seeking a career in law enforcement. And we've done more with human resources and recruiting through repurposing positions that we had in other areas. Again, we did this without having to hire anybody new, but yet repurposing and moving the resources that we already had around. Technology, you've afforded us the opportunity to, in many cases, build our own technology. We provide that service to not only Seminole County and the various municipalities, but in some cases contiguous areas when it makes sense for our citizens. Again, we save quite literally millions of dollars, and the folks that we have working in technology solutions are incredibly talented and could go work anywhere else in the world and make probably 4 times the money that they make here. But they're all in on serving the community, and I think that's the type of people that we attract here. But you've heard about some of the programs that they've built before. Seminole Neighborhood Policing is kind of our backbone of our enforcement efforts. It's at least the most visible aspect of what we do, and this is a decentralized concept of policing that assigns people to the areas closest to where they reside. They work in a very community type of way, and we charge them to be active problem solvers, look at situations and awareness, and I know relying on county staff, that helps us tremendously there, because a lot of the things that we're working on are streetlight projects and road projects and sidewalks, and all of these things have a direct correlation to quality of life and community blight. There's a theory called broken windows, which suggests that incivility within a particular community that goes unaddressed and untouched has the ability to court in larger criminal acts, because it gives the impression that nobody cares. And that's why, litter on the streets and things that are broken really need to be fixed, and are fixed here in Seminole County pretty quickly. Communications, big group of professionals, 113 people that are up there. Consolidated dispatch, again, with most of our cities. And they've been working so hard through COVID and really met the demands and expectations. And quite literally, there was a couple of COVID outbreaks up there because they weren't able to socially distance, because those communication stations are where they're at, and it's just a confined environment. But they're doing well now. And of course, special operations. This is our SWAT team, aviation, bomb team, bomb squad. There was some maybe minor discussion about, the law now allows us to use drones, and that contract that you signed to allow us to use drones is not intended to randomly fly over people's homes. And typically anytime we do something like that, I'll get 50, 60, 70, 100 emails about what are you doing now. But this is situations where we would normally be using the helicopter, SWAT situations, search warrant situations, photographing a traffic crash on the scene, but we're not just randomly flying drones that are out there. But this does help, because normally we would have to get the helicopter up, and helicopter fuel is very expensive. We can get a drone up and fly it over there and take some of those photographs as well. DIS is the investigative arm of the Sheriff's Office that has, all of our various, whether it's major crimes, our cold case squad is something that we're very proud of. Our team just had a successful prosecution of what I feel is a serial killer. I mean, he killed a Navy veteran back 35 years ago, and now a suspect in a murder in Hawaii. But that cold case squad is all volunteer members of the NYPD and people who've retired from various agencies. And that's one of the things that we try to do, is court in people that have credentials and qualifications that are willing to volunteer their time. But this is domestic security and all of those investigative arms, City County Investigative Bureau, that falls under DIS and CCIB. Forensic services is the next area where we quite literally have scientists that are working within our area. Some of them are PhDs. And you can see just from their stats, 9,700 items of evidence and property, 1,300 latent prints, 224 prints processed. It's their work that allows us to forensically examine a scene and track people back down after 35 years. I mean, the digital DNA evidence and the things that they're doing is just absolutely remarkable. Domestic security. We also not only do our domestic security here, but we're very active in what's called the Central Florida Coalition of of 7 to 9 counties that come together and look to track domestic-related situations that cross jurisdictional boundaries. We know that with the major metropolitan area right now, somebody that Orange County or Osceola County may be watching. It's important for us to look at that as well. But they're doing terrorism, counterterrorism, all local home-grown threats that are here. They're monitoring and tracking all of that activity. Of course, we have a different approach with our Drug Enforcement Center. With your support, we've, really have done all of these things to get people clean. We are one of the few correctional facilities in the country that do all 3 forms of medical-assisted treatment and therapy. I'll remind you that 2 of the inmates that are participating in our programs over the past year, 2 year, have requested an extension of their sentence because for the first time in many years they were getting clean. And I think that what we're doing with Advent Health is just the beginning. Many more exciting things that are coming down the path to capitalize on that partnership. Oh, and by the way, we hold the record for successful prosecutions for first-degree murder for drug dealers than any other county in the state of Florida. And I think that that's kind of a narrative that sometimes is lost with all of the things that we're doing because it's pretty innovative in getting people clean, and I think our community understands and recognizes that's a big part of it. But we are also extremely aggressive on the drug dealer that's selling deadly doses of narcotics. I think working with our State Attorney Phil Archer, we've now charged more than 30 people with first-degree murder for dealing deadly doses of drugs. School safety is, of course, a wonderful partnership, a big responsibility that we have day in and day out. And I think that early on, we identified that our role as deputies on campuses extends well beyond safety. I think safety is paramount. I think it is always kind of the motivating factor to have somebody that's there. But what we're doing quite literally is building relationships with kids. We're teaching curriculum. We're serving as a resource for the faculty, staff, and parents, and really breaking down those stereotypes day in and day out. And that's why, I'm so grateful that you allowed us the opportunity to do this before it was ever a requirement and mandate. And I'm so grateful that we have people on campus that actually have a desire to serve kids. And that's a big part of it because some people are just trying to fill vacancies right now. We are actually filling vacancies with people who have a passion and desire to work with kids. And I think that's so important. Our school crossing guards are in there. As you know, Seminole County has received school crossing guard program of the state 5 times out of 7 years. And that's quite remarkable. They skipped 1 year. Or I think we would have had 6 times out of 7 years, but it's quite literally they're the best in the state. This year we transformed our Child Protective Services Division to Family Services Division because we found that the services that we provide through our victim advocacy, our elder services, and our youth services are all similar, and it really is that core fundamental family component. So we've combined those without adding any additional FTEs. We just re-identified the division and kind of moved some things around based on commonalities. But this is our Child Protective Services and investigations, and Lisa had shared with you that our budget with the state has remained flat over the years. We've already started negotiating with them and hopeful that they can do more to help us in this regard as they continue to adjust the state pay for protective investigators. It's important that we keep up with that. Our juvenile justice area that works on treating the underlying conditions that are present. I think that our partnership that you've created with our juvenile detention center is so unique. I can only imagine the harm that would be caused if we were sending our youth that are either on the verge of delinquency or classified as juvenile delinquents into a space that was just a common unknown space where they could, in many cases, try to radicalize themselves by an incarcerated population. The same programs that we do in our adult facilities, we're also doing in our juvenile detention center and our various wraparound services and programs, whether it's a SNAP program where we're treating, again, those underlying conditions that may be present in a child's life as they move down the path. Our team is trained where if there is a young child that's acting out in a way that looks like it's a criminal justice concern, the first thing that we do is ask why and what has that child been experiencing in their own life to make them or influence them to behave this way. And that all occurs within that division right there. Community justice and rehabilitation. This is our new area within our correctional facility of, dedicated, trained people that absolutely love seeing people get clean and move down the right path. And what has happened is, quite honestly, when we first started going down this path of treating substance abuse and mental health, some people were asking the questions, really? Do we really need to go down this path as a law enforcement agency? And the most remarkable thing happened is when you see somebody's life transform in front of you, it releases endorphins in the body that makes us feel better about ourselves. You feel like you've accomplished something and you want to go back and you want to do more. I think for me, this picture reflects that because those are the females participating in our opioid program within our correctional facility, surrounded by the staff that is working with them day in, day out to get them clean. And I think you can tell from the smiles on our staff members right there, it's been a long time since they felt that good about something that they're doing. When you walk up on the second tier of our correctional facility, there's a collage of photographs in this particular pod that shows these women when they were clean and sober. And in some cases, it's them with their children. Other cases, it's them with their parents or other loved ones and family members. But in the end of the day, I think that that's what we're working towards, is to get them back into that type of environment so they can not only survive, but we can lessen the burden on taxpayers to raise, in some cases, generations of families because the problems were never fixed. We know that if you are the son or daughter of somebody who's incarcerated or addicted to a substance, you are 8 times more likely to engage in maladaptive behavior yourself. Or our tax dollars raises generations of families because we never fixed what the root cause of the problem was. And then, of course, our corrections and security operations, we're excited to partner with Chief Judge Jessica Rexedler to expand our problem-solving courts. Because of COVID, problem-solving courts have not been as active as they were before, but we've got a great judiciary, wonderful judges that believe in providing diversion opportunities when necessary, and we have, in honor of Sergeant James LaRue, one of his visions as serving as a United States Marine was to particularly and specifically help veterans that are incarcerated. And this pod right there, the photograph that you see right now, is our new veterans dorm, which will be housed with military veterans that are involved in the criminal justice system, ultimately going through Veterans Court to receive catered services facilitated by navigators who are also veterans to get them on a right path towards recovery. This is just a whole host of the various programs that we're doing on the inside of our facility. Intake and release and screening, and you can see that's another program with our staff members up on the right side of that with inmate participants in a program, which are there. And I will remind you that some of these programs look nice, and I mean, these are tough programs. I mean, they're doing medical assisted treatment, they're doing cognitive behavioral therapy, they're getting up before the crack of dawn and having to go to work. All of these things are actually occurring, but they're embracing that. We do that, and we're so tough on them like that because we think it's an expectation that they will perform that same way after they're released from custody. We want them to get into the habit of getting up and going to work and being productive and self-supportive and all of that. But it's really, really a new and innovative approach that we've partnered and we're doing within our facility. Healthcare is a big part of what we do in the budget, and I learned a big liability as sheriff, but, we feel that the same level of health care coverage that people receive on the outside, they should be entitled to on the inside. And a part of rehabilitation, which by the way, I think rehabilitation is way overused in the most purest sense. Rehabilitation means make what it once was. But for many people that we come in contact with, they were never right in the first place. I've had 5-year-olds tug me in my pant legs during the execution of a search warrant, and at 5 years old say to me, check me to see if I have any warrants for my arrest. It just shows the negative influences that young child had in their lives. So what we're doing is we're habilitating as much as we're rehabilitating, and one's personal health is a big part of that. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is you got to take care of yourself before other things fall into check and fall into place. So our healthcare staff is incredibly passionate about doing that, and they're the best in the business. Judicial services, we provide that security and protection to the entire judiciary, the 3 courthouse facilities, and then our other 2 buildings. Your main headquarters building here, that judicial services section provides security to this building, and then, of course, the building that you have in 5 Points that we're in right now, the building 100, we're providing security there. Judicial services is also an area that we, as sheriff, one of the 4 responsibilities is to be the chief administrative and executive officer of the circuit and county courts, which means every time a judge orders a civil process, they order us to take care of me, to take care of that responsibility, typically through deputy sheriffs and other folks. But that's a big responsibility, a lot of judges and a lot of security to our buildings and security. So that's kind of a breakdown of all of our divisions, our sections, where we're at, where the money goes. And with that, you have anything you want to add, Lisa, before we open to the commissioners for questions? One of the things that I do want to add is transparency is also important to us. So we take this budget presentation, and it is accessible on our website, our sheriff's office website. You can go to all of our archived budget submittals are there. Typically, what we will do internally, and for people who want to see it, is we archive this video and we let our folks see it, and anyone who wants to come in and do it. But I think transparency is a big part of what we do. I also recognize that none of what we do that is good, just, and working would be possible without your support, your collaboration, both collectively and individually. We have such a wonderful relationship with you, and I am incredibly grateful on behalf of all of our members that you have allowed us to collaborate and work and do a lot of these things. And I want to thank Nicole and her staff as well, because we work so hard with them, particularly with over the past 15 months with Alan Harris and his team, and I think he's done a remarkable job trying to keep us informed and keep our community safe. So great job back there. With that, I'll yield for any questions.
Thank you, Sheriff. He was walking out, but he heard his name and he stopped and turned around. Thank you for the thorough report. Questions or comments? Good to see you, Andrea. Anybody, this is the first time we've got back on, so nobody knew that you weren't here anyway. So
Well,
does
now
it?
they do.
No, I mentioned that you had a prior thing. Does anybody have any questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I may not be having questions, but I have a couple statements, if I may.
Please, go right
Thank you,
ahead.
Mr. Chairman. First of all, Sheriff, thank you very much for your transparency and also for your leadership and for the leadership of your whole entire department. What the men and women of the Sheriff Department does is truly a class act, and I can't thank them all enough, so thank you. And please, when you see them, thank them from us. I'd have a couple of comments, and it's not really directed towards you or your department, but I'd just like to get some updates, if I may. The first one goes to Brian Applegate. Mr. Applegate, can you pull down that microphone, please? If I may, County Chairman, ask staff some questions.
Oh, please, go right ahead. This is,
And it may be more appropriate, Mr. Applegate, to give us an offline update, but I would like to get an update at the appropriate time of the opioid lawsuit to figure out where we're at and how we're coordinating not in any great detail from the legal aspect, but how we're coordinating with the Sheriff's Department with that.
Sure, absolutely.
Because there are potential funds that could be brought back into the county coffers, and I want to make sure that we are all up to date with that. So I'd appreciate an offline update.
Yep.
The next question I have is on, and I was taking notes, Sheriff, on page 12, you talked about some capital improvements. One, actually two of them in the jail system. One is the hot water upgrades for $315,000. The other one is additional electrical improvements for the chillers of $215,000, a total of $530,000. I'm hoping that when we're talking about the upgrades that we're doing at 5 Points, they're actually looking at this and coordinating with the Sheriff's Department, so we're not doing redundant work. And I know we hired an outside consultant, Henson, Henderson? Is that the name of the group?
Hanson.
Hanson, I'm sorry, Hanson, for sustainability, and I'm waiting to hear from their updates, because when we're putting a centralized chiller system, I'm hoping at some point we'll take your facilities off of the standalone chillers and go to the centralized system. That was my interpretation when we talked about 5 Points. I'm hoping that we're heading down that path. But again, these are just comments from my standpoint, and at some point, I'd like to get an update from our county staff regarding those items. The one issue that both you and Ms. Briggs talked about was the fuel. And with everything that's happening nationally with the fuel on the eastern seacoast, I'm hoping that at some point during our budget process that we'll be talking about some type of increased fuel bunker that we've had. We talked about that years ago, and I want to make sure that whatever happens when the interruption of fuel, that we are preparing for that. Hopefully it never happens. I know a number of years ago we did put in a couple of bunkers at some locations. I don't know if they're adequate or what the status is, so at some point I'd like to get an update from our county staff regarding that. And then last but not least, Sheriff, just a comment. I know at Metroplan Orlando, we're doing a pilot program with Orange County, as well as Advent Health, for artificial intelligence, for accident detection, and moving up first responders, and it's also with Advent Health. So if you need any additional information on that, please let us know through Mr. Dredge, and we can give you more information about that, because it's a pilot program that I'm hoping at the appropriate time we can roll into Seminole County as well. So, but anyway, great presentation. Looking forward to continue working with you and your staff.
Thank you for your partnership, Commissioner.
Further questions or comments? Commissioner Zimbauer.
I want to thank the sheriff and his staff for holding the line on the increase this year at 3.5%. I know that you and I had some discussions, during the pandemic, how important it was not knowing where we were headed, and I appreciate you all taking that consideration on behalf of the county and the taxpayers. Is it possible that we could go to slide 7 real quick, which is the crime rate? There we go. And I know you touched on this a little bit, Sheriff, as far as, but I don't know that we went into enough detail for the audience to understand what you actually do in some of the cities. I mean, the cities have their own departments in many cases, but your sheriff's department gives them support, backup, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know that most people understand that, the Seminole County Sheriff is providing a great deal of support for those other agencies in those other cities. But with that said, on this chart, just for my benefit, and the decreases in crime with the increase in population in the unincorporated area, have we taken into consideration annexation in these time periods, that the cities have annexed portions of the unincorporated county in this? Just curious.
So I don't think specifically the areas that have been annexed. I think that the trend that we see here relatively holds true within all municipalities. This is the unincorporated areas of Seminole County. I think that the municipalities largely are seeing a similar trend. My PowerPoint presentation, sometimes I do at other events, looks very similar to this when it's a county as a whole. It's kind of more of a state of the criminal justice system for our county, but I don't know that we've ever kind of pulled out those areas. I will say in all candor here, I think that there's a shifting trend that moves away from those 7 categories of crime. And within the next 5 years or so, I think that the murder, rape, robbery, ag assault, motor vehicle theft, parts and no parts metrics that we've used for the past 100 years will change. I think that with the evolution of technology, people are still committing crime, but it's not necessarily in that category 1 level of crime. If somebody commits a crime on the internet, let's say, they're still victimizing people, but they never have to see them face to face. So I think that in some cases, this can give a false perception of actually where it's going. I don't know that it's completely going away. I think it's shifting to other less trackable categories.
Sure. Thank you very much. And that actually segues into my next question, which was white-collar crime. I know you didn't go into that much detail, but you have folks actually dedicated to that area, correct?
Yeah, so we have a task force, a countywide task force that the municipalities, we run the task force, we provide the supervision and the coordination for it. Municipalities actually assign investigators, and the white-collar crime scenarios are going through the roof. Actually, one of our deputies that deals with digital forensics received a national award yesterday from the U.S. Secret Service. They were in our office. It was the 3rd time she had received that, because we have a Siri, a canine that actually has been trained to sniff out digital electronics that do that. But one of the things that was another unintended consequence of COVID-19 is people were thrusted into a cyber type of profile and footprint. Some were not ready to do that. Some were less familiar with the ways to protect yourself from victimization when it comes to that. So we've seen the numbers of white-collar crimes skyrocketing. And it's typically during tax session where we see the greatest fraud where it comes down that path.
Exactly.
That's one of the reasons why it's so important that, our technology requests are up to date, because as soon as new technology presents itself, the offenders typically go out and get it, and we have to make sure that we, and we do. You afford us the ability to do that, but it's a big demand.
Very good. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. On behalf of the citizens of the county, we thank you very much for the community policing that you do and helping the community in its entirety in so many ways that people perceive law enforcement as the folks that go out and put handcuffs on people, when in fact, we have a lot to be proud here in Seminole County that our Sheriff's Department is not so much visualized that way, but actually on the front end, like you so eloquently indicated, in helping the community find their way and do that before the costs escalate, and we just can keep repeating that for generation and generation. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Lockhart?
Thank you so much. I really value our partnership, and we've talked about that a lot, and you've identified the collaboration, which is wonderful, but I think we all know that it's your leadership and your team that is stepping forward and continuing to show leadership and courage in a time when your chosen career path is being marginalized and questioned on a regular basis. So I just feel that I need to say to you publicly that our community and the folks that I see on a regular basis could not be more grateful for the fact that we have a board and a community that values law enforcement, and we respect you, and we are so grateful for the job that you do protecting us. I feel terribly for some of these other communities that feel like they're at odds with the folks who are there protecting them. And so not just as a member of this body, but as a wife and a mother who's raised my family here, I could not be more, I could not have better feelings of safety and security knowing that we are here in Seminole County with the folks that run your agency. So thank you. I see I'm making eye contact with some folks in the back who have been wonderful, wonderful team members. So I want to say that.
Well, thank you so much, Commissioner, and I will tell you, the support of this commission means a great deal to us. It allows the men and women that are out there protecting our communities to not second-guess their decisions. And, you know, we've become, long ago, an agency that has embraced community policing and all of that, but I think that sometimes when all of the basketballs are handed out in the back of the car and all of the reading sessions with young kids are there, and we're out there doing that, there is still inherent dangers about this job. We had 3 deputy sheriffs involved in a shootout 3 weeks ago in broad daylight in the middle of a laundromat, and they quite literally could have been ambushed very easily, but put all of those fears and concerns aside to run as heroically as any person could ever do into a situation that put them in the clear, open, middle of the street with no cover, no concealment, because they wanted to protect citizens that they had not ever met. And with no regard of economic status or color of their skin, they acted heroically. And you know, it feels so good to our team to work in a community and for leaders that appreciate, support them, and encourage them. And I can't thank you enough, all of you, for providing that atmosphere here in Seminole County and our citizens who truly make it an honor to serve our community day in and day out.
Thank you. I have a mundane question about the actual budget. I wanted to just get clarification, the difference between, on page 21 of the presentation and page 33. Repair and maintenance services on page 21, is that inclusive of vehicle?
Yes, it is.
And then page 33 is fleet. Can you just, can you kind of go through those numbers and how they correlate? Or they include, is 33 inclusive of 21, or is that somehow separate? So
the back, let me try and see if
Okay.
I've got your question. The back part, which is by division, is showing the collective accounts that are reflected on the sub-object detail on 21 and 20 and 21 and 20 for operating expenses. That's at the agency level, the 21 and 20.
Okay.
The back is a different slice. It's down where it's allocated out.
Okay.
Now, many of our charges, and this is a great point to bring up, are centralized. So when we run our fleet operation, it is charged and run centrally. About the only time we're charging outside of that fleet number, so since we looked at slide 33, fleet is a total of $4,863,000. For us, that's our spend. There might be a little bit that doesn't apply because we have to do some statutory charges for reporting for judicial and corrections, but predominantly when you're looking at this back area, it's an all-in number. So if you look at the same thing with technology solutions, which is on slide 35, that's an all-in number for our agency predominantly. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you very much.
And if you would like to look at more of a detail of the sub-object lines, so you can see as an agency what's programmed in those lines, we'd be happy to share that. We've shared that in the
grateful that
past,
you
but-
have made the offer.
Yeah.
However, I do not feel the need.
Mary and her
to
team
do
have
that.
it sliced every way, so we'd be
Thank
happy
you.
to show you what's in those sub-objects too.
Thank you.
If we can't trust
Anything
our
else?
police, who can we trust?
Commissioner Hurd?
I just want to stop and thank all of the men and women that work for you for making you look so good every day. It starts with the people that are in the field, the people that are in the administrative offices. The lift and the way you run the business office is exceptional, in addition to the fact that, and that aids the ability to keep our citizens safe and to be forward-thinking. And I'll stop and thank you for being as forward-thinking as you are about how to prevent future crime and how to improve the generational needs of certain communities that need our help. And we got to change the way we've done this. We can't keep doing things of the past and expecting a different outcome. So I appreciate the men and women that make you look great every day, and I appreciate you for being forward-thinking and giving them the next challenge.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, and truly they are. I think that one of the things that we're most intentional about is who we hire and who we bring in, and I would argue, I think that, you know, we have the best of the best and incredibly talented people, so thank you for identifying that.
Anything else? Then, Sheriff, let me just echo what some of my colleagues have said already. I'm not going to repeat it. I think you know of our relationship and the positive feelings that all of us, I think, have about the Sheriff's Office and your staff. I did want to thank you because people don't know, but would intuitively appreciate the fact and understand the fact that this is about 51% of the total budget of the county. And so if you this year are keeping your rate at 3.5%, it makes it so much easier for the rest of the 49%. Truly, we want to thank you on that. I did have one question because I think you mentioned with the statistics that you have here, the rise of white-collar crime and especially identity theft. And can you just, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but you just give us some of the, not only the concerns, but I don't want to call them solutions, but the opportunities that, we have in that.
Yeah, the identity theft is a big problem, and I think that, again, COVID thrusted a lot of people to have an online presence that did not exist before, and because they got pushed in that direction, they never had the opportunity to go through various seminars and classes and ways that they can protect themselves, software packages that are available. So, what I'm hopeful is that as we continue to see this rise, that we can get back to open public forums where people can come together, be made aware from members of the Sheriff's Office. If there's ever any company that would like us to come in and do an assessment of their online profile and format, we'd be more than happy to do that. But there's numerous resources, software that are available out there, but every online cyber type of situation is increasing. The scary thing is, statistically, when it comes to like child sexual exploitation online, the reported numbers have decreased because just like domestic violence and child abuse, a lot of these things were identified in a school setting, public setting, and when people were in their house by themselves, a lot of the whistleblowers were never identified. So these children were thrusted to an online profile, which many of them may have never been online before, and now they've become very, very comfortable to that. So we've got to protect that, but protecting your identity, making sure most victims of identity theft, they either have their information stolen from another website that's sharing it through a black site, dark web access. It's a constant challenge, but we're going to get out there. We're going to make ourselves available to any citizen that may want to call or to have preventative direction provided. We'll do that. Chief Conway, do you have anything else you want to add with the cyber aspect?
I will just tell you that recently I was contacted by the Secret Service right here in town, that, my own identity had been taken for a long time from an individual who is in the county jail right now, who went after back in the 2006, 2007 era for celebrities, and then recently is back because he was taking it from elected officials, because a number of our information is so easily accessible, and he was doing that, getting false identifications and then using that to try to purchase other things and pass checks and things of that nature.
It's pretty frightening, because we see some people who actually, are stopped and detained because the person's identity has been stolen, and now it results in an active warrant for their arrest. So there's a lot of work that we have to do on the front end to make sure that we're making contact with the right people. And that situation that happened with you, Chairman, there was other high-profile elected officials and celebrities, and it's pretty alarming.
So many schemes and scams out there.
Absolutely. If it sounds good to
Truly
be
is.
too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah.
But the last thing on that is, I always want people to feel comfortable contacting us, whether it's 911 or our non-emergency line, if there's ever any question. A lot of times people say, well, I don't want to bother you. It is never a bother. Their information that they're providing may be the one link that allows us to apprehend somebody for doing that.
Well, it is strange when you get contacted and you've been a victim and don't even know it. That's the scary part. So then you want, what happened? What have they been doing? Is there any other further questions? If not, we want to thank you very much, and all of the staff and everyone here. Tim, Lori, we all have had briefings. I know this is this is pretty deep dive that we're doing. But I also want to be sensitive to the rest of the commission as far as lunch. Would 50 minutes be enough, do you think?
Yeah, I think that'll be enough.
Questions? Then I'm going to give a 10-minute break, because we've been here an hour and a half. And would somebody please raise the temperature over there? Commissioner Lockhart is turning blue, and I see a number of other people doing a little shivering out there. So if we could raise that temperature a little bit, I would appreciate it. And with that, we'll be back at 10 after. Thank you very much.
I always feel like I'm in a hole.
Everybody,
So let me,
I mean, no, I mean, it's crazy.
okay, before we go to the next agenda item, I wanted to make sure that we gave anyone in the audience or in cyber the opportunity for citizens to speak or comment. So is there anyone in the audience? I have no requests to speak. So is there anybody, Clint, in your neck of the woods? Clint, you there?
Yes, sir.
Is there anyone out there?
No, sir.
Thank you, Clint.
Mr. Chairman, just for clarification purposes, this is regarding the sheriff's presentation.
Yes, this is regarding the sheriff's presentation. So there is no one here present or no one in virtual world that wishes to comment on the sheriff's budget. Sheriff, then you can feel comfortable in leaving and getting back to the good work.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, moving along now, we're going to go into with Tim and Lori Bailey Brown, and they're going to provide a budget overview and fund forecasts. And Lori, I believe that you're going to lead the discussion on the reserves. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, the two of you.
thank you, Commissioners. For the record, I'm Timothy Jex with Resource Management, and we're here with the CFO, Lori Bailey Brown. This part of the work session is going to be an FY22 budget overview that includes a millage comparison, major revenues, FY22 expenditure requests, fund forecasts, and then a discussion on reserve policy by Lori. First of all, I want to make sure everyone has a copy of the supplemental information that was distributed. Some of the reports that we're going to show on the screen will reference information in the packet. This chart shows the total millage rates used to generate property taxes for the surrounding counties. You can see more details on page 3 of your supplemental package. This includes our general millage, fire district, roads, school board, and other dedicated millages. Seminole County has the lowest total millage and the second lowest general fund millage in the region. This is a 30-year history of Seminole County's general fund millage rate. It was 5.4 mils in 1991 and lowered down to 4.99 before property tax reform in 2008 required the board to take the rollback rate of 4.3 mils at that time. That coincided with the start of the Great Recession, which saw property values drop by 30% through 2012, when the board settled on the current millage rate of 4.875 mils. These are the major revenues we're going to cover today. The first four are in the general fund, and gas taxes support transportation trust, and then we'll go into tourism taxes as well. This chart shows your ad valorem revenues, which make up 74% of the general fund and are based on the current millage rate of 4.7851 mils. At the first public work session in March, the property appraiser estimated that the taxable values would grow by 5% next year. And while we've seen a lot of strength in the residential real estate market over the last few months, we expect this number to be in line with his original projections. A majority of the increases have been on the residential side, which are capped by the Save Our Homes legislation. So we don't anticipate to see much more, maybe up to 5.5% growth for FY22. This will generate an extra $8.2 million in general fund revenue in FY22. Up next are half-cent sales taxes. There's a backup report on page 4 of your supplemental packet that shows the monthly collections. These revenues are collected locally within Seminole County and make up 10% of your general fund. We collected over $26 million in 2018 and 2019. We had anticipated a 10% drop in these revenues during the shutdown. We actually experienced about a 4.6% drop, which is better than we expected, and we're anticipating to put $2.7 million back into reserves at the end of this year. For FY22, we're budgeting $26.4 million in half-cent sales tax revenues. Utility taxes are assessed at a rate of 4% on electricity, water, and natural gas sold in unincorporated Seminole County. These revenues make up 3% of your general fund. We originally anticipated a 4% reduction going into FY21, but this revenue was mostly unaffected by the shutdown. We're currently trending 11% above the original estimate, and we're forecasting to beat the budget by $1.1 million, which will also go into reserves. For FY22, we're forecasting $8.2 million in utility tax revenues. Next are communication service taxes, which are assessed at a rate of 5% on cellular, cable, and internet services. They make up 2.2% of your general fund. And while these revenues were not significantly impacted by the shutdown, they have been falling in recent years. We're down 25% since 2015, and the FY22 estimate is $5.2 million. Moving away from the general fund, we have gas taxes, which are used to fund transportation-related activities like road maintenance, traffic engineering, and mass transit. These revenues peaked at $16 million in 2019 and then fell 12% during the shutdown. For '22, we're forecasting $14.5 million in gas tax revenues. The last major revenue we'll cover are tourism taxes, which peaked at $5.8 million in 2018. These revenues were among the hardest hit by the economic shutdown. They fell by 28% in 2020, and we're forecasting another 10% drop in 2021. If you look at page 8 of your packet, you'll see that we have started a partial recovery in January and February. We're conservatively estimating FY22 revenues to be $4 million. On the expenditure side, the numbers that we're going to be showing now represent budget requests. The departments submitted their requests in March. The constitutional officers submitted their requests on May 1st. We have had multiple meetings with the county manager, but final decisions have not been made in terms of what she'll be proposing for the budget, so these figures represent the numbers requested. This slide shows the total countywide operating budget, which includes general fund, fire fund, and transportation trust. Approximately 51% of our budget is dedicated to public safety, which is primarily the sheriff and our fire department. If we look at just the general fund, which excludes the fire department, 58% goes to public safety and 42% to non-public safety. The Seminole County Facilities Division in Public Works is responsible for maintaining over 400 buildings and structures countywide. They worked with our internal departments to identify needs, and they're requesting a total of $5.5 million in facilities projects for FY22. These are broken into two primary areas: proactive maintenance and department requests for improvements and renovations. These include improvements to fire stations, the jail, our comm center, and parks and recreation. Staff has done a thorough review of all the requests, and we prioritized everything with public safety and safety issues being the highest request. Then come requests that have the most ongoing costs. These are the best bang for our buck. Then we move to roofs and HVACs, which have the highest cost of failure. Then we move to lower risk maintenance items like floors and painting. And then finally, we have requests for improvements from our county departments. The 5-year average that the board has funded for facilities requests is about $1.5 million. Seminole County has approximately 1,100 passenger vehicles, heavy equipment, generators, and emergency vehicles. In 2019, the board adopted a 7-year plan that would bring the age of its fleet to within industry standards. We accelerated that to a 5-year plan in 2020, which is what this $11 million replacement request is based upon. This would replace 124 vehicles, with $4.1 million going to the fire department, 1.5 to the general fund, 3.3 for roads and traffic engineering, and $2 million for utilities and solid waste. In addition to this, we have $1.9 million in new additional fleet requests that are being considered. Next, we have $3.4 million in countywide technology. These are projects that would be managed by our Information Services Department, but are primarily for the benefit of other countywide departments. These requests include $1 million for a redesign of the Fire Emergency Communications Center and $400,000 for an upgrade to the Public Works Asset Management System. These requests are in addition to 60 major projects that Information Services is currently managing in the FY21 budget. And the board has approved approximately $1.3 million per year over the last 5 years for technology requests. Now we're going to move on to personnel requests. The county currently has 1,487 FTEs, and the FY22 budget includes requests for 72 more FTEs, with 27 being for the fire department, and the rest spread between leisure, public works, environmental services, and community services. New position requests are among the most heavily scrutinized when we go through our budget development process, so it's not expected that all of these positions will be approved. Now I'm going to switch to your supplemental package. Page 9 includes a general fund forecast. Go ahead. So this forecast includes all the revenue information we just provided and assumes that all expenditure requests will be fully funded. We have the property appraiser's taxable value growth in the first line, and we have total revenues in the, for FY22 estimated at $251 million. If all expenditures were funded, we would have a $15.3 million structural deficit, which is highlighted in gray towards the bottom in FY22, and it would leave the ending reserve at $40 million. Page 10 shows an assumption of $8 million in reductions, which have not been finalized, but these are potential reductions that could be made to the FY22 request, which would leave us with a $7 million structural deficit and $49 million in reserves, which would be about $19.5 million, 19.5% of revenues. Highlighted in peach, we've also included estimates for Phase 1 of the 5 Points debt service and the Sunrail operations cost of $12 million in '26. What's not included in this are key strategic priorities that were identified at the board retreat recently, so that may be added to the budget. And you can see how the reserves trend over time. Next, we have a fire fund forecast. This forecast is pretty strong. The FY22 revenues are $84 million, and FY2 expenditures are $86 million. Included in the expenditures are a lot of significant capital items. And then on page 12, you can see some forecasted capital needs for the fire department. So we have to consider those future needs as we're making decisions in the FY22 budget. And finally, on page 13, we have our tourism fund forecast, which includes a moderate assumption for revenue recovery. As I said, we peaked at $5.8 million. This has us getting back up to close to $5 million. We are forecasting a structural deficit each year. And what's not included in this forecast are some significant reductions that we made in the current year that may have to be reinstated, as well as a project to resurface the fields at the sports complex, which we're looking at for FY25 or FY26. So that concludes the presentation on revenues and expenditures and forecasts. Does anyone have any questions before we move to the reserve policy discussion?
Yeah, let's stop there. Are there questions, Commissioner Lockhart?
Could you provide us with an FTE history of the organization over the same length of time that you've done some of the other look-backs? I think 72 new FTE requests looks like a lot. I'm not saying that it isn't, but I think it would be helpful to have it in context of the organization over our recent and not so recent history.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, just for clarification purposes, Commissioners, I think we should at least go back to 2008.
Yes, that would be helpful, because I think that's where we had the precipice.
It's an excellent point, but I
Okay.
think 2008, 2007 is a
number.
good point.
Yeah.
And I think in the interest of saving time, I think I prepared that document that they're referring to in 2019. It might still be in my office. I'm happy to share it. Specifically from 07 or 8 moving forward, that may be helpful.
You just circulate that, that'd be
We
great.
will.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Please. Yes, go ahead, Commissioner.
Related to FTEs, it is unclear to me in the process that I see here. I see the current number of FTEs. What I don't see is the current number of open positions how is that calculated in? So I had a fairly great conversation with Terry McHugh around those needs, but am unclear as to whether or not you are forecasting additional positions on top of the open positions that exist. And if that is the case, then we need to be thoughtful around that.
The numbers we provided were full FTEs, so they would include the vacancies.
So we need to see, they would include the vacancies.
That's the total FTEs that can be filled.
But I don't see the vacancies. So that's a little bit of a challenge in terms of management decision-making around the notion that you're asking for X number of new positions, but I don't know how many you're sitting with open positions right now, that if you filled them, would you still need new positions?
We can give you that because that's something that we consider from the county manager's office as we sit down and go through the budget with Tim and decide which positions. So we look at the same data, so we can easily share that with you.
Okay. Commissioner Zimbauer?
I think what we're talking about maybe is currently encumbered in the budget positions versus what's being asked here.
Yeah, and I will tell you, I'll remind you that last year we unfunded some positions and froze some positions. And
Right.
so the frozen positions, the board released that freeze when we did the last budget work session. So we are actively recruiting and attempting to fill those positions. The first thing that we looked at as we started going through budget were the unfunded positions, the from last year's budget. So those are kind of the top of the priority list. But we also do look at vacancies every time we do the budget to see, do we really need to, can we just reallocate a position rather than fund a new one? So we have that information, we'll share that with you. But this year, we're looking additionally at the positions that were unfunded in anticipation of the economic impacts of the pandemic.
Commissioner Delory?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tim, can we go back, and you don't need to go back to the slide, but I'd like to have some conversation on the half-cent sales tax. I appreciate the number that you shared, but does that also address any anticipated increase on online sales that now can be charged tax?
Yeah, the forecast that we're using relies mostly on history and
That's
watching
what-
how this current year is
That's what I'm
trending.
asking. And?
And we're assuming basically level half-cent sales tax. We're not assuming a lot of growth from online sales.
But with the new state legislation that's hopefully going to get signed or passed, that there should be some anticipated increase in that, and I'd like to have some additional information on that. The next is, you talked about the communication sales tax dropped 25%. Why?
Communication service taxes dropped. It's primarily due to bundling, people moving away from cable and people combining their phone and internet services. This is the answer we're getting from the state when we ask. The drop has slowed some recently, so we think it may be bottoming out, but primarily due to less people using those services.
And wasn't there some statutory changes on those taxes as well?
That's what Commissioner Delory was asking,
Yeah, I think there was some statutory changes on that.
but the bill hasn't been signed yet.
Yeah.
That's for the online sales.
That's for the online sales on the,
Now,
but there
for the
was
bu-
some changes,
For the bundling, and
communication
Commissioner
tax.
Zimba was talking about is correct.
there was some changes on that too.
But I'd like to get some more information on that. Is there anything that we need to be addressing on either one of those fronts? To make,
We'll certainly get you that. The other thing I'll mention, Lori Bailey Brown, Resource Management, is that occurrence is happening in all counties around the
well, I
state.
realize that, but just because it's happening, we need to anticipate
Absolutely.
why, where, and how,
Yep.
and are there any adjustments that we need to be making? Or are adjustments that we can make? There may not be, but I don't know. The next question I have is with the gas tax. At one point, I believe we asked for information on electric vehicles. Has anyone researched that yet? And if so, can you research that information? Because electric vehicles are going to be going up, the sales of them, obviously. And you meet more and more people, just like the chairman that has a hybrid, but there are 100% electric vehicles now that are being purchased, and gas tax is going down. I'd like to understand that number. I believe that number does exist. I just don't have it.
We reached out to the tax collector's office to track registrations. We didn't get a lot of historical information, but we can submit what we did get.
Okay. And then also with that gas tax, you listed, I think it was $14.5 million. Is that our portion? Because we split it or break it down with the 7 cities, or is that the total number?
That's our portion. That's recorded within Seminole County's books.
Okay. And then facilities, you have 2.7 million of increase of additional needs that we talked about. I'm hoping that with the bringing forward of this new engineer to look at sustainability and energy efficiency, that number can actually go down. And number 2, do we have any information, because you talked about the roofs that need to be replaced. I'm hoping that we are keeping up with the bonding of all our roofs to making sure that we're still in compliance with them. We've talked about this in past years. I'm hoping that someone is actually keeping track of that. Technology request of the 3.5 million. I'd like to get some additional information to see, since technology moves so fast, literally, is there any ability to outsource some of that so that we can capitalize on the fact that technology keeps on changing so quickly? And then, as the other commissioners talked about, when it comes to the position request, I'd like to get some more information about the vacant positions, the ones that are funded, that have not been filled, and the ones that have been established in the past that have been defunded. So those are my comments.
Good questions. And we will be going over the facilities and technology and position request on June 29th.
Okay.
So we should have more information then.
Thank you.
Commissioner Zimbaugh.
Just on Commissioner Delari's point on the gas tax, my office should have a FDOT detail on the gas tax, the trend, and projections that I'll be happy to share with you all, to share with the commission or vice versa, whatever. So you don't have to spend a lot of time going digging that up. My office has that.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate all the hard work, Tim. I think you and your department, there's a number of people that you work with. Everyone spent a lot of hard work on this, so thank you.
Thank you.
Tim, I did want to also comment to you and Lori that the projections really going far out, including to talk about, the potential Sunrail costs, to talk about the potential replacement of the ball fields and everything else like that. I mean, it's really good to see long-term projections and really taking into consideration some of the things that we know are coming up. But I think that one thing that both Commissioner Zimbaugh, Commissioner Dory, and we all understand is, and this is not new, this is something that we've been projecting even before the electric cars, is the gas tax is going to go down. Cars today, even if they aren't electric or hybrid, they use less gas. And so, we really need to take, if that is going to be a significant portion of a budget, we're going to have to take some serious looks at what we're going to have to do to have that. And what is, just for everyone, what is the gas tax that we have today ourselves, county? It's 6.
6 cents.
And what could we go to?
We have an additional 5 cents that we could levy.
Okay. I just wanted that to be, out there. That doesn't mean anything more than just knowing what the numbers are. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I guess
Yes.
one more comment, just to dovetail what I think you talked about or hinted about with Sunrail. I would like at some point to try to figure out a funding strategy of the Sunrail portion of our budget, which is the 12-point-something million dollars. One thing that people have talked about in the past, and this is just a comment, that to look at the TOD to see if there is TIF, what the TIF is on the TOD increase each year, which is due to Sunrail. And there's several reports out there that actually look at it. We should be looking at that as well.
I would agree. It's a good point the Commissioner brings up, that we should be looking at that very closely and see how we leverage that if at all possible.
Because that's going to play an important role if Sunrail ever gets to the airport through Brightline, because then they're going to want to go nights and weekends, which is an increase of 60+%.
Any other questions? Tim? County Manager, did you have any comments on any of this before we go to the next thing?
No, sir.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Is there any, I'm going to stop here, ask any in the general public have any questions or comments? Clint, anybody out there in cyber?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. All right, Ms. Bailey Brown.
Thank you. Lori Bailey Brown, CFO, Resource Management Director. I'd like to start off by mentioning that we're in work session number 2 of the budget process. Like Tim just mentioned, we've recently received all the requests of all of our departments, and on May 1, we received the request from our constitutional officers. That's a change in our policy the second year. That really helps us in planning and getting things prepared a little earlier to bring forth to you the best proposed budget. So with that, we'll have a few more work sessions. They're scheduled, and Tim will go over those at the end. And as we're developing this, we will come and report to you through those work sessions. So to begin the discussion of reserves, I would like to say that the strategic planning process is the backbone of the entire budget. It's about influencing the future rather than adapting, which is exactly what the budget is designed to do. In government, to influence the future, or to happen at all, it must be included in the budget. It can't happen if it's not budgeted. We will merge these two tools together to achieve the strategic goals. A best practice in budgeting is tying our capital projects to the strategic plan. That plan should be interlaced throughout the budget. This key strategic priority should remain part of the strategic plan to hone strategies for fund balance and reserves. Today, we're going to go over where we are with fund balance and reserves and recommendations for the future. Before we begin our discussion, I'd like to briefly go over fund accounting, which is the fundamental accounting system governments and nonprofits use. It's an accounting strategy. It's part of it's called GAAP, Generally Accepted Accounting Procedures. And it emphasizes accountability of each fund, and each fund has their own set of books: assets, liabilities, revenues, and expenditures. The funds track the restrictions that are placed on resources and tracks how the money is used within each fund. All the funds are rolled up into categories for reporting, and a lot of times, well, certainly in the CAFR, we're rolling up many, many funds to give you one report. So with the slide that we're showing here for fund accounting, there are actually 3 types of funds. We don't have fiduciary funds here in Seminole County. That's typically a pension fund. But we do have governmental funds, and we have proprietary funds. Governmental funds are used for activities primarily supported by taxes, grants, and similar revenues. Proprietary funds are activities that receive support from fees and charges. The general fund is the operating fund. There's always only one, and every government or anybody using fund accounting has to have the general fund. The authoritative guidance defines the general fund as basically the fund used in default. So to account for, it's for all the resources that can't be accounted for in one of the other funds. So let's talk about special revenue funds. We've got a lot of those. The numbers to the right are how many of each type of fund we have. Special revenue funds determine and demonstrate that resources that must be used for a specified purpose are in fact used for that purpose. Examples are gas tax revenues, discretionary sales tax, tourist tax, MSBUs. Because there are legal or other agency regulations on how these funds are spent, they are special revenue funds. Debt service funds accumulate resources in anticipation of debt service payments. And capital project funds are used to account for and report financial resources that have been specified for a capital project. An important reason to separate capital projects is to avoid distorting your operations in your general fund. And we have, it shows 6 here, but the one primary capital fund we have right now is for 5 Points with our $75 million construction loan in there, keeping separate accounting of that as we move forward, looking at a future bond issue for phase 1. I would tell you the other 5 funds are basically residuals of previous capital projects that we've had, where we have to maintain those funds because they're not a lot, trust me, in these, but we maintain them because they were put there for a specified purpose, and then any rehab, say, of the correctional facility, we would use those funds for any small projects. Then we have proprietary funds. They're separately categorized, and there's only 2 types: enterprise funds and internal service funds. Enterprise funds report on a full accrual basis. The other funds I've mentioned to you are on modified accrual basis. That means a lot for accountants, but just know the full accrual basis is more like businesses, and in our enterprise funds, we use the term expenses instead of expenditures because we are trying to treat these more on a business base to make sure that we're charging the fees to cover the costs. Fees are charged to external users for goods and services, and they generally have outstanding debt backed by fees and laws that required fees to be set to recover costs or pricing policies to set fees to cover costs. We have 2 enterprise funds. That's our solid waste fund and our water sewer fund. Well, I say 2. There's actually multiple funds, but they roll up into those 2. The internal service funds provide goods or services to other funds or departments or agencies on a cost reimbursement basis. They're commonly used for fleet and information services, and they operate on a break-even basis. Our 3 internal service funds are for insurance. They're for our health insurance, our workers' comp insurance, and the property and liability insurance. We may move to the future, I'll let you know. I'd like to, as we work through the capital asset management plan, which was a key strategic priority, to talk about using an internal service fund to track fleet and technology, rather than our current process of using a sub-fund, which rolls into the general fund. As we isolate and analyze those activities, we're going to want to isolate the activities for fund reporting so that we can see them more clearly. Thank you. Actually, at this point, I'm going to go to page 15 of the handout. It is a one-page document that shows reserves of all of those funds I just went over with you, all the types that we have here in Seminole County. It starts with our general fund, of course, then lists all of the special revenue funds and their total reserves over the last 5 years. Then our capital funds, all rolled into one line item, our enterprise funds, and the internal service funds. This is a bird's eye view of all the reserves of the county. You'll see that for each year there's 2 columns, the adopted and amended. That's because, as you probably have figured out in the budget process, we start with the adopted budget, which we're developing right now, that you'll approve and adopt in September. And then once the capper comes out, February, March of the following fiscal year, of that fiscal year, we get the actual numbers. So we true up our fund balance to an amended. So that's the difference in the reserves there, or the effects of that true up. I'll note on this slide as well, the general fund, you see the adopted general fund was 46 million, 46.5 million, and amended to 56. We have informally broken down those reserves. In our ledger, I know that the commission has asked that we present reserves in one total amount, but I just want to go over with you how the budget office has kind of broken it down to manage reserves better. So we have $10 million that we've identified for disaster, $10 million for emergency, about $10 million for future capital outlay, knowing that there's a radio tower that needs to be replaced in about 10 years, and we have the reserves here. And then the remaining $26 million is held in what's called a reserve for contingency. And as we get into our current policies for reserves, I'm just identifying those here now to let you know. We've reported them to you in summary, but in our records and the accounts, we've broken them down into 4 categories. Okay, now if we can go back to the slides. I will mention, too, that that $10 million increase from the adopted to amended reserves included over $2 million in excess fees from our constitutionals that we weren't anticipating. A large portion of that was related to the property that the tax collector sold in the last fiscal year. And we go over, when we bring the mid-year adjustment that amends budgets, that's a public hearing. We go over those adjustments during that process. So this slide, I've prepared a budget equation. I just thought it's important, if this isn't the way you guys think about the budget when we're discussing it, it's a good picture to have, especially as we talk about fund balance and reserves, because I'm going to go through the difference. This picture shows the difference between fund balance and reserves in the budget. Fund balance is also referred to as cash carry forward. The left side of the equation is always equal to the right, and there are two pieces of beginning budgetary fund balance. There's the fund balance brought forward from prior year for budgeted projects that were not completed, and in the general fund, that was about $6 million. And they'll be included in expenditures on the right side of the equation, because we're expecting to get them done. Because it is the residual cash of prior years added to the current year revenues for total revenues budget. So I want you to understand, a lot of times when people talk about the revenue budget, they may not just be talking about revenues. It may include fund balance, and you have to discern that sometimes. That's going to come up when we're talking about different policies for various counties, when they refer to their revenues budget, and are they including that fund balance or not. On the right side, I don't have a whole lot to say there, except that, expenditures plus reserves is your total expenditures budget. So in a perfect world, if you were bringing forward a fund balance and it equaled your reserves, you're not planning on using any of it. I've never seen that happen, to where some of it isn't spoken for, but like I said, a portion of that fund balance is typically for projects. Maybe in the first year we wouldn't have had carry forward projects, but there's always something in process that we're carrying forward in each and every fund, not just the general fund. So now let's talk about GAAP fund balance versus budgetary fund balance. GAAP fund balance is the equity, assets minus liabilities of the fund. GAAP financial statements present 5 different categories of fund balance, but I would suggest only one of them is useful to budget, and that's the one that's unassigned. I'm going to go quickly through these 5 categories, and I'm doing this because the policy I'm recommending has all of this verbiage in there, and it's important to know. It's also how our CAFR presents fund balance or the equity on our balance sheet. Let's see, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, or GASB, is one of the 2 boards that establishes generally accepted accounting procedures, and they came out with a GASB pronouncement 54 back in 2009, which identified these categories of fund balance that must be reported. The first one is a non-spendable, which is your inventory. That's why I would say budget's not interested in that one. Then you've got your restricted, which is restricted to outside parties like the court funds. They do roll up into our general fund. When I say funds, I'm talking about money, but court monies that are restricted for their purpose by outside parties are not part of our unassigned fund balance. And then you have committed, which in Seminole County is the Arbor Violation Trust Fund. A tree preservation ordinance was passed by the board committing funds for a specific purpose, and those become committed on the balance sheet. Then you have assigned, which is generally spoken for based on where the funds were budgeted, such as those sub-funds I mentioned for fleet and technology, building improvements and economic development initiatives. Those are all in the general fund, but they have been committed for certain purposes. So as far as the equity of the fund, while they may be available, they're not really available to spend. Everything else falls into an unassigned fund balance. And the unassigned fund balance is the piece the budget office will evaluate in those 2 pieces for budgetary fund balance on the equation. The differences between unassigned fund balance and budgetary fund balance, particularly those sub-funds can create reconciliations, and I'm not going to take you through that process, but no, the GAAP or CAFR fund balance doesn't traditionally roll straight into the budget. There's a reconciliation. It's not a big one, though. I would say it's pretty darn close. And keep in mind that we're estimating that budgetary fund balance a year before the actual CAFR fund balance comes out. So right now, we're estimating the fund balance for 9/30 to start the budget with, and then we'll know this time next year what that actual number is. Next slide. All right. Reserves are the cornerstone of financial flexibility. They provide options to respond to unexpected issues and afford a buffer against risks. Managing reserves can be challenging with the question of how much money to maintain in reserves and how much is enough, when does a reserve become too much. I'm showing here the Florida statute 129.01 says that counties may reserve up to 30% of the budget with 10% for contingencies and 20% for cash balance liquidity. That's the law. So we may. I will point to you now on page 17 of the handout. You'll see our current policy for reserves is consistent with this statute. It pretty much spells it out right there. That's part of our policy, is that we will not exceed those amounts in the Florida statute. Florida statute also mentions the next one, 129.02, mentions the capital outlay reserve, but it's not restricted as to size, only that capital projects are separately budgeted. If I can go to the next slide. I'm just pointing that out as we go through the current policy, what we have in place now. So we've talked about the law, the Florida statute. Now we're going to talk about the industry best practice. GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officers Association, is our, they put out the industry guidance, the best practices. I could go on and on about GFOA, but anyway, their best practice for general fund reserves recommends at a minimum, regardless of size, that we maintain an unrestricted budgetary fund balance of no less than 2 months of operating revenue or expenditure. That's about 16.7% of annual revenue. 2 months of operations is $40 million for Seminole County in our current budget. I would also note that GFOA, while they're prescribing this as the minimum, they say that every local government needs to take their own situation into account. Definitely hurricane-prone counties need to consider that. And our other risks that we have to think about when we're considering reserves, such as revenue volatility and economic downturns. So that's the legal and the best practice guidance from our industry leaders in government finance. Now let's look at the industry. And on the next slide, and I'll also, in the handout, I've got a lot more details on page 14. We have some industry comparators for reserve analysis comprised of many of our neighboring Central Florida counties. The list begins with population and taxable value provided from the Office of Economic and Demographic Research and is sorted by taxable values. Then we show the operating millage per the Department of Revenue, which we know is not necessarily apples to apples because some counties have separate library, mosquito control, and MSTU millages. The next 3 columns are the countywide adopted budget, the general fund adopted budget, and the general fund ad valorem revenue. I thought those were interesting to compare, but the key columns are the next 2. Labeled FY21 general fund reserves, the first column is the dollar value of the general fund reserve for each county, and the next column is the percent of either operations or revenue, depending on the reserve policy. But keep in mind, operations is what they refer to as the operating expenditure side, is typically very comparable to your revenues if you're structurally balanced. Next, we have the bond ratings, which are all S&P except for Lake County, which is not rated by S&P, so we included their Fitch rating, and then a brief description of each revenue policy as included in their budget document. Our most comparables are Osceola and St. Johns and Volusia County, with similar general fund budget and ad valorem revenues, as well as a similar amount of reserves and reserves as a percent of revenue or operations. Lake County did indicate in their budget message an intent to increase the reserve policy to prepare for emergencies, to better prepare for emergencies and natural disasters. Next slide. I guess I could do that. Here we show, on this slide, we're showing a history of amended general fund reserves for Seminole County. Reserves safeguard local governments against budget restraining risks like recessions and extreme events that demand a quick, decisive public safety response. In order to gauge how much reserves are necessary, you got to understand your risks. There's lots of guidance on this, and we will, in fact, as part of this key strategic priority, be doing some more risk analysis. But I'll just go over with you a couple of approaches real quick for things we can consider in the future. GFOA published a resource in June of 2019 called Stress Testing Your Reserves with Advanced Analytical Techniques. They use a AAA approach to uncertainty. The 3 A's stand for accept, assess, and augment. Of course, accepting, we all got to understand that another recession is going to come, another storm is going to come. Assessing which risks we're subject to, for most local governments, that includes the recessions and some sort of natural disaster. And there's also man-made disasters like hazardous spills or infrastructure risks. The third A is augmenting. A good risk management strategy looks beyond reserves to consider other tools such as insurance, short-term financing, to make the county more resilient. There are some variables that influence your reserve strategy, such as your ability and willingness to cut the budget in response. This is typical for local governments, and on page 17 of the handout, which is part of our current policy, I just wanted to note that we have an emergency budget procedure, which is triggered before going to reserves for an emergency in an effort to absorb as much of the impact in the current budgets with cuts or shifts in anticipated spending. We used this policy last year during the economic shutdown. We froze hiring, reduced mowing cycles, deferred fleet replacement, and facilities maintenance in response to the economic shutdown. Another variable that influences your reserve strategy is your acceptable reserves to maintain your credit worthiness. The amount necessary to maintain our current bond rating, that is, the amount necessary to maintain. Of course, we want to keep our bond rating. We don't want to see it change unless it's for the better. 30% of the bond rating is based on fund balance as a percent of revenues. And per the rating methodology published by Moody's in January of this year, less than 15% of fund balance as a percent of revenues is a single A rating. Greater than 15% and less than 30 gets you in that AA rating category, and above 30 gets you in that AAA. We are right in there where bond raters prefer reserves at 20%. Most underwriters will tell us during discussions they like to see 21%. Another variable that influences your reserve strategy is your ability to borrow from enterprise funds, which is decreasing, as we'll be talking about this afternoon. Their reserves are forecasted, well, we're talking about solid waste. Solid waste doesn't have the bond and debt covenants that the Water and Sewer Fund has, and they helped us out a great deal during Hurricane Irma. In fact, they're still looking to recover some of those FEMA funds, actually, from 2017 or 2017. They are there, and they should be considered as part of our variance that influences our reserve strategy. We've just gone through the financial forecast as part of the budget preparation process. The forecasts indicate that we may need reserves to budget the FY22 budget, and there's forecasted ongoing deficits. I would also point out that our current year budget includes about $4 million of reserves to balance the budget this year for FY21. When we talk about structural balance, and Tim had that on his slides, we want structural balance meaning zero, our total revenues cover our total expenditures. Otherwise, for every dollar you're over, you're dipping into reserves, so you got to have them there. If we were in a structural balance situation, that's certainly going to play into our reserve strategy. GFO recommends that governments adopt rigorous policies for all operating funds aimed at achieving and maintaining structurally balanced budget. The policy should include parameters for achieving and maintaining structural balance where recurring revenues are equal to recurring expenditures in the adopted budget. We'll be working on this policy next and bringing you recommendations for achieving structural balance. Let's do the next slide. Finally, the current financial policy for reserves we have seen are consistent with Florida statute. I would like to address the fund balance policy first because, like we discussed in that equation, the fund balance comes before reserves. Our current fund balance policy is outdated with the implementation of GASB 54, and the range of 5 to 10% is below what's required for our bond rating and is less than the minimum best practice recommendation. Our current unassigned fund balance is 27% of revenues in the current year. I'm going to ask you, in the handouts, you can look at page 30 and 31, the last 2 pages of your handout. This is the recommended fund balance policy based on the GASB 54 guidance. And we're recommending that the fund balance policy be as prescribed by GFOA with a minimum unassigned fund balance of 17%. The policy guidance on the appropriation of fund balance is in excess of this minimum. The policy guidance on the appropriation of fund balance in excess of this minimum is for one-time capital needs. I'm sorry, included in the guidance, included in this policy that you're looking at on those 2 pages, we have described when fund balance is above that 17%, the things to consider using it for. They would be one-time capital needs or infusion in a capital management plan or paying down debt service. Being careful not to use them for operations. Again, in discussion of that structural balance. This new minimum fund balance policy has potential for appropriating or committing $15 million in current fund balance for non-operating expenditures or future capital projects. Remember, we had informally identified $10 million of current reserves for future capital for that radio tower replacement, which is expected in 10 years. Just keep that in mind as we appropriate fund balance. And we'll be bringing to you those future capital needs. But I would say before you think about any future capital needs, you would wait to commit any fund balance until structural balance in our budget is achieved.
Lori?
Yes.
Let me stop you there. Let's break this down, because we're going through a lot of different things here, and you're saying you're making recommendations. The bottom line is, and we need to talk about this, the fund, this is not, on these recommended revisions, you're not asking us to make a decision now, but let's be very clear. The fund balance, J, there, we have 5 to 10% is what we have as our fiscal policy today.
Yes.
Our CFO is suggesting that it be for bond and for other purposes, bonding and other, bond rating and other purposes, that it be moved to 17%. Is that correct?
No, I would say that the current fund balance policy is a 5 to 10%, which we're in excess of. We're at 27% in our current fund balance. So I'm suggesting that we update that fund balance policy to include the latest authoritative guidance for what fund balance is.
And that's 17%, and you're suggesting 17%?
The number that I'm suggesting is 17%, and that's based on those GFOA, that minimum recommendation from our industry guidance. It's also looking at our bond ratings,
Right.
where 15% would put our bond rating in jeopardy.
All I want to do is, since we're talking about this right now, I want to see if there's any, because this is the first recommendation
That's
that
right.
you're making in here. And our fund balance policy right now says 5 to 10. We're at 27 currently, and you're suggesting that the fund balance that we would put in here, instead of 5 to 10, would be 17.
Yes, sir.
The 27 that we have right now, between the 17 and the 27, is $10 million. And that's another suggestion down the road that you're going to make, either for, that we have to talk about, that $10 million can be used for either, for other purposes that you have described just now. So does anybody have any questions of the CFO concerning the recommended policy of 17? Okay, that's why I said I don't want to
Thank
keep
you.
going and going and going
No,
and
I
not
was-
really discuss this. Commissioner Herb.
Let me give you a series of questions because it may just be a discussion in total. We know we want to do a bond
Yes.
for 5 points. Our bond rating right now looks to be less than others.
Okay. I'd say it's in line. There's a couple of them with pluses.
It's in line, but
Yeah.
we're in the middle of that food chain. Is it possible for us to improve our bond rating before we do the bond through this mechanism? And if it is, then why are we recommending the minimum?
Very, very good question. Right now, I mentioned that our current fund balance is at 27%, so we're pushing, anyway. We will be evaluated when we go out for our bond. We will be evaluated. We're currently at a AA rating. The more reserves we have on hand, the better our credit rating is going to be. It will impact. Is there a direct correlation between reducing reserves and your bond rating? I can tell you this. When fund balance is reduced, they hone in on that right away. There's a question that will be asked, why? And if that question is anything other than infusion in capital or some kind of planned use of that fund balance, if it's for operations, that could affect the bond rating. Fund balance, I mentioned, is 30% of the rating agency's evaluation. I mean, there's other things they consider besides how much equity we have. I can't say, I'm recommending a policy of a minimum of 17%. I'm not saying to reduce our fund balance down to 17%. Thank you. I'm saying our policy should be a minimum of 17%. We can go above 30 if that's what the board would like to do. But I'm just saying, if it gets down below 17%, we got to look hard, because I'm saying we're running into liquidity issues. 17% keeps us in a sweet spot of bond rating, and it also we're in line with industry practice, and I'd say we're in line with our comparators too. Even at 17%, we're lower than everyone, but not too much lower. So again, it's a minimum. I'm recommending not that we go into fund balance by any means. I'm just looking at the policy. This policy, the only other change besides that 5 to 10, changing it to a minimum of 17, is to say we're going to have some guidelines in the policy for appropriating or committing fund balance, so that they're for specific non-operating things.
But Laura,
If I-
but you are recommending to go well above the 5 to 10 that we have now.
Yes.
So,
In the
If I- if-
policy, County Manager, I'm sorry, I don't know if you can see
but
her.
Jay,
I just,
Commissioner
if I could just
Zimbauer-
add something to Lori's
Yes, please.
answer.
I'm sorry.
We have
see
we have a
everybody.
policy, a fund balance policy, which for all intents and purposes, fund balance is what we typically refer to as reserve. And if you read the reasons for it, it's reserve. So we have a policy of 5 to 10%. The practice of the board, though, historically, has been to stay in the 20% range. That's been directive. It's been one of the guiding principles for the 11 years I've been here to prepare a budget. I think it preceded that. So there's been sort of a guiding principle that's been given to staff stay in that 20% range. The policy has said 5 to 10%. One of the things we'd like to see from a staff standpoint is some reconciliation between practice and the actual policy. So that's part of what we were trying to achieve here. In addition to, you've asked us to look at what's an appropriate level of reserve. The additional thing we'd like to have come out of this is to have some consistency between the practice and the policy.
So can I continue to
Okay.
flush through
Yes,
that?
and then Commissioner Zimbauer is next.
So is the idea that we would accept a minimum, and what I think I heard was that our policy statement isn't going to negatively impact our bond rating. It is our practice that will impact the bond rating. So if we have a policy statement that says 17, would we add to that policy statement that what our goal target is? Because spending down to the 17 doesn't make sense to me either, given how long it takes to recover from something, and given our decision-making processes, quite honestly. Right at the point that we're sitting and looking at 5 points.
Right, and again, I'm suggesting that we change our policy. First of all, it's outdated. It was done a really long time ago, and I think Lisa Spriggs is here who brought it in
Understand.
place
We
at
gotta
that
do
time.
that.
And back then, 5 to 10% must have made sense. I would say that increasing that policy to a minimum of 17% is going to be seen favorable in the eyes of the rating agencies, because we're just increasing the amount we're saying we're going to hold in fund balance. I'm also suggesting a minimum here, not to say that we're going to decrease down to that minimum, just saying that if we go below that, and in fact, our policy has steps in there for what we do if we go below 17%, which is we meet and talk about it and figure out how we get back to 17. The board is very able and welcomed, and I mean, you can keep that fund balance, the actual fund balance, as far above 17 as you want. And right now, I mentioned it's at 27% for bond ratings, for liquidity, to save for some future capital, if that's the intention. I'm just recommending that we update the policy to recognize that we're not keeping 5 to 10%, we're keeping over 20%, but that minimally, we don't want to go below 17. I felt like this was a good recommendation in light of, I know we've had, well, actually, I'll tell you this, there is a template that GFOA puts out, and they recommend that you go with a minimum. So you're not going to cap yourself, because if I said, let's keep a fund balance of 30%, you know, the struggle is there to maintain that. We're talking about the minimum. And we can go, the further above that we go, the more rating agencies are going to love us.
Okay.
If I would add to
Go ahead.
that too, though, that whatever if the board decides that they want to do a policy but have a different practice, I would like to have some guidance on what that practice would be, so.
I was trying to get there for you.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
And I'm going to recognize, are you finished, Commissioner?
Thank you.
Lori, for everybody's edification, you've said GFOA 25 times. GFOA.
I mentioned they're the government.
What is GFOA? Just
They're the Government Finance Officers Association.
thank you. That's all I wanted to make sure of.
No problem.
Commissioner Zimbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to thank you very much. I've been pounding on the table since I got here about reserves and getting things in balance. I've been beating on the table about the current policy that exists, and nobody's ever wanted to adopt a new policy. We had the discussion last year. I actually circulated the policy before the budget hearing and so forth, but nobody wanted to take that item up. I think this is great work. I commend you for the detail. I think this is something that would be very valuable to a new commissioner coming on for future, because this really gets down to the meat and potatoes at the level that should be looked at in making those ultimate decisions. And that's what I have continued to struggle with is, you know, the policy versus reality versus what are the true reserves not only in the general fund, but all the other funds, which you have clearly outlined. So thank you very much. And I would want to make sure that whatever policy we ultimately decide we're going to adopt, have the input from our staff of what that means. The goals to get to where the policy might be may or may not include increase in revenue levies, i.e. tax increases. Whether you want to have those discussions or not, it's a discussion that has to be had. We have, and I've said since I've got here, good decisions were made at the great downturn or the falling in 07, 08. You had a reduction in your millage statutorily. There was decisions to reduce even further by the then board. We never got back to where we should have been. We continued to cut, and go lean, and we've never really fully funded a lot of things with staff, with fleet, other things in this county. So the reality is it's going to come down to what this board ultimately wants to do. Do we want to continue to patch it and keep it rolling along as best we can and hope for the best outcome, or do we want to try to get it back into a healthy financial situation that actually funds the needs that our staff have and our community needs? So I think it's going to be a pretty large discussion in my mind when we get to that point. But we're going to need to know what those projections are and how we get there. So thank you very much.
Commissioner Delory?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All really good points, and I appreciate them. Lori, I appreciate what you and your staff have been doing in putting this together. I think it's right on point in so many levels. I would like to have a little more information, if I may, on the bond ratings. I've been involved with it for quite some time, and we've actually increased our bond ratings over the years. I'd like to see some analysis of what it actually means to us dollar figure-wise on a typical bond when you go up in ratings, when you stay level, and when you go down in ratings. There's a number value there of savings and expense. And so the question is, looking at this spreadsheet that you gave us, there are literally there's 4 counties that have either 4 counties have higher bond ratings than us. You have St. John's, it's a AA+, Sarasota, AA+, Hillsborough County, AAA, Orange County, AA+. Those increases, what did they mean from them financially at the time of the sale of their bonds?
Are you asking me?
No, I'm not asking now, but I think it'd be valuable for us to understand what that is, and even if, not insinuating this, but, if you went down to a AA-, because right now we're a AA, what does that increase or decrease in rating actually mean to us, dollar-wise?
Okay.
I think that would be something that is important to us to understand, because with that, you're putting money away, or we're putting money away to increase our bond rating. How much of that savings would we be looking at the life of that bond over X amount of time? That's really the question.
Okay. But keep in mind, I would also, we definitely can come back to that, but also fund balance or equity is a portion of the bond rating.
30%.
Okay. Yeah.
30%.
I realize that, but I mean, if you're a AA and you go to AA-, what does that mean at the sale of that bond for X amount of dollars? That same value, if you went up to a AA+, what does that mean in savings?
Okay.
That's what the public needs to know. So, anyway, great work. I think this is something that we should definitely bring back to the board, and I look forward to hearing more dialogue and more of your recommendations. Good
Okay,
job.
I stopped Lori there because that was a recommendation she was making, and I wanted to make sure that we had all at least vetted it and talked about it, because it's going to come back. But you haven't finished with your presentation, have you?
Right, there was just a couple more points.
Please go ahead, okay, before we...
Quickly.
Mr. Chairman, the county manager was trying to
Okay,
weigh in.
Deanna.
Well, I just wanted, I thought Commissioner Lockhart had her hand up. I don't want to step. It's hard for me to see everybody, too. I
I
don't want to
know,
step on you.
we gotta figure out
Yeah.
I don't know,
Yeah.
we gotta something different.
Did you have something?
I am good, thank you.
Okay.
I'm fine.
Do you have something?
I actually have a question. So you want us to bring this back, and you want to talk about it some more. I want to fully understand what additional information you need, because we tried to give you forecasts, we tried to give you sort of the industry practices. What additional information would you like in order to consider Lori's recommendation or alternative recommendations?
Mr. Chairman, I have no problem moving forward with her recommendation, but at the same time, before we take official action, I'd like to know what that dollar figure is on a typical bond, either going up or going down in ratings. What is that value?
And that I've got, and I'm not pushing you to make a decision today. I just want to know if we're going to continue to talk about it, I want to make sure we're getting you the right information.
Commissioner
I
Hurst?
understand.
I love this concept that you're bringing up here. I think, from my perspective, not as it relates to other counties and what it saved them, because I think that's a different discussion, so.
I'm talking about our county.
Okay, so our county, and maybe we can have it in the form of, for every $1 million of a bond, the rating change does this to the rate, does this, some idea, so that we can sort of socialize that in a meaningful way. It's how do we translate that? What is the value of this is really what you're trying to
That's what I'm
get
asking
to.
for.
Yeah.
And I think we all understand that that is fluctuating constantly. I think that what Ms. Bailey Brown is doing, and I see, Hilltop in the audience, is suggesting that she's trying to find the sweet spot. Okay, am I wrong?
Nope,
You're
you're
trying to
right.
find the sweet spot.
Well, and
It's
I'm
5 to
recommending a
10%. It's
policy.
5 to 10% as our policy. We have always been over that, or recently, we've always been over that. And right now, we're at approximately 27%. You want to change the policy to be 17%. You're not suggesting that we spend down to 17%. You're just saying that this policy should be 17%. And quite frankly, I'm willing, like Commissioner Delory, to say that I'm not the expert. I'm going to listen to you. Sounds good. We can always change it, but I for one am also supportive of that recommendation. Okay. Yes.
Chairman, since Hilltop is here, I'd like to ask them a question if I can.
I was going to introduce at the end of my, at my conclusion, this is Mark Gallagher with Hilltop Securities, our financial.
And Lori, once again, what I'm trying to do here is, I want a full discussion. If we have to, we can go to the afternoon and look at what time it is, everyone. So I just want everybody to keep in mind where we are. Go ahead, Mr.
For the record, Mark Galvin with Hilltop Securities. I have no problem being able to put that together. Until you're ready to issue the debt, what your rating is really doesn't make any difference other than what you're for pride. You do have some debt that's going to be coming up with 5 points in the near future. And so as it relates to the policy will end up being, it's not what the minimum is, it's what you actually have, what they would do the analysis, especially after coming out the COVID. And if it wasn't for the CARES Act, there probably would be a lot more counties that would be, and cities that would be downgraded. And Commissioner, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to ask a question.
You're right on point. One of the questions that I was going to ask you, going to the Moody's and Standard & Poor's rating meetings, it's interesting some of the questions they ask and how they evaluate you. I'd like to actually see category-wise on some of the questions that they ask typically, not just of staff, but at that meeting, because they actually not only talk about the county, they also talk about the 7 cities, they also talk about the school board.
Oh, absolutely. Like, if you take a look at the criteria that I think was passed out, like, once again, fund balance is 30%. One of the benefits for the county itself is that the overall economic and demographic strength that's part of the county. There's a lot of teams that are going forward. Once again, today, because I think more because of the COVID situation, is that one of the key things that they're looking at is to see liquidity. Is because we were very fortunate that we were able to get the vaccine and we're coming out. If this thing would have dragged on and not had a vaccine for another year or so, there would be a lot of communities that would be downgraded.
So the next question I have is for Lori. You talked about doing a reserve risk analysis, or risk reserve analysis. Has that been completed, or are you in the process of doing that?
No, I was going to mention there's basically 3 levels, a basic, an intermediate, and a very the Monte Carlo approach. So I
think that's appropriate, Monte Carlo gambling, I get that.
It's an approach to assessment of risks. Really, it's a very advanced, that would be using risk analysis models and so forth. I'm not ready to go there just yet, but I used a very basic approach considering, what we've gone through, knowing what our storms have impacted us in the past, how we've responded to those, the recent recession that we had, or economic downturn, economic shutdown of last year, the Great Recession of 2009. We've seen those effects, so I basically have used those to assess with the recommendation that I've made. I also want to say that when I opened this presentation, I talked about how this reserve policy, fund balance policy, is something that should be addressed every year as part of the strategic planning process. So our policy is a minimum, or the recommended policy is a minimum of 17%. We would look at that as part of the strategic planning to get board's direction on where you want that to be on an annual basis.
Okay.
Commissioner.
Could I ask, I'm sorry, I was going to ask.
Sorry, if you raise your hand, I can see you.
About what Lori.
Thank you. Yes, go right ahead. And then Commissioner Zimbauer.
Lori, if we were to do it on an annual basis, then should you just pick the number for that budget year? Because
Yeah, I'm just suggesting that it would be discussed, whether it's in a budget work session or in our strategic planning session, that we look at reserves, where we're at, and is that the point in time when the board would like to, they would consider based on structural balance of the budget. I've mentioned that as foremost. Before we would want to take any fund equity in excess of that minimum and use it for capital or one-time needs, you would want to make sure that you're not needing your fund balance reserves to balance your budget, or to go out for a bond issue if you wouldn't want to affect your bond rating just before you're going out for a loan.
But you've suggested that we not go to 17%, that would be a minimum, but that you're not suggesting in this budget that we go to 17%.
Correct.
So I'm still trying to reconcile those two things.
Commissioner Zimbauer.
I would just, a couple points. Thank you. My fellow board members need to consider this is still our county manager's budget. It's not our budget at this point. Number two, if we're going to have this discussion about reserves at 17% as a minimum, if we turn to page 9, and what I was alluding to earlier, if you're going to adopt that level as a minimum, if you look at the forecast, you see where you're going to, where we will be. If you adopt that policy, you'll see where we're going to be for the fiscal year 22, 23, 24, 25, forecasted, if the full ask of what's been asked thus far continues forward. Now, we've got a $15.3 million deficit in the full ask. So basically, there's $15.3 million that is either going to have to come out of reserves for this year, which will put us down to 16.2. So if you adopt the policy of 17 minimum, we'll fall be below the policy. And moving forward, we would have to assume, and I guess we're going to hear from our county manager and our staff, on these $15.3 million of full ask from all the divisions in our county, are they going to be deferred next year, the following year, et cetera, or are they fluff? And that's ultimately the discussion we have to arrive at that policy decision, whether we're going to have that reserve at that level, et cetera, et cetera. So just to make sure that we all understand, if that's our policy, our goal to be that policy, we're going to maintain that. If it's going to be a little bit over that. And that's what I was referring to earlier, where we're going to have to rely upon our staff to identify and give us as much information to help us understand, because it does us no good to adopt a policy that says 17% of the minimum if that's not reality of what can be obtained with the current revenue streams. We've already heard about the loss of communication taxes, fuel taxes, the other impacts that we've taken, and how we maintain a policy that we may adopt. So, just for clarification.
The et cetera, et cetera, et cetera is where the details are.
That's right, exactly. And there's a lot of et cetera.
That's where the details are. And once again, this is, Ms. Bailey Brown's, she's looking at this as far as our policy is 5 to 10 right now. And she's saying that as far as a policy should be changed. Now, we're not making any decisions right now. And that's something that
Understood.
I think we've all done that. But I think the county manager, if I'm looking, is asking for some help and guidance.
So we're in the process of developing this upcoming budget. And there are typically some guiding principles that we use as we put the budget together, first and foremost. And I'll share all of this with you, of course, in the budget message is we're moving forward with there's an assumption that there won't be any change in the millage, that there will be a certain, that will maintain levels of service as close to where they are now as possible, that we try to incorporate as much of the retreat-related items into the budget as well. But one of the other principles is how much reserve, because that tells me how much we need to cut, how much can we supplement with reserves. So getting at least some idea as we continue to refine the budget, if we're in the right ballpark. You don't have to make a decision today, but it would be helpful to just get some feedback as to kind of what your thinking is. Is it, and what your concerns might be with respect to the reserve. Lori gave you some things to consider. We can refine it more in discussions with you between now. We're shooting to get the budget out to you by June 15th. So over the next few weeks, we're going to be refining things. And this discussion is just helpful to kind of understand what your expectation is with respect to reserves, because in the last several budgets, we've attempted to keep them at the 20% mark, in large part because of the bond rating, but also because it's a conservative approach, and the Great Recession was not that far off, that we still remember how difficult those times were. So any sort of feedback you can give us with respect to, are we on the right track? Or is 20% just absolutely where we need to be? Is that too conservative? What your comfort level is with us dipping into reserves? I mean, we showed you the full load budget where it came in 15 million over where we needed to be balanced without dipping into reserves. We've already identified significant cuts on that. The feedback that you give me today will help us determine kind of how much further we take that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, well, Commissioner Lockhart, then Commissioner
Lockhart, you haven't spoken yet.
Well, I know we're all between everyone and lunch, so I do think this is a conversation that we need to pick up later. I will tell you, I am completely on board with getting our policy updated. I understand you're trying to probably split the baby at 17%. I'd love to have some conversation and include Dan O'Keefe and where he feels comfortable as well, and what he sees out and about, and he knows our organization very well. I respect the fact that the county manager has presented two different forecasts for us, one with what I would call the wish book. You get that catalog right before Christmas, and there's a lot of great stuff in there. And then she's also presented us with what would be the $8.2 million of reductions, which might be a little more in line with where we're actually going. So while I appreciate what Commissioner Zembauer is saying, with the full boat, but I don't think the full boat is likely where we're going to be landing. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I would agree with you, and I'm not, it isn't my intention to bring you the full boat budget. And we typically, last year, we started 16 million over where we needed to be balanced. We had some pressures last year that we probably won't have this year, but every year we start significantly higher. And I just wanted you to see, and it is a wish book, but to our department director's credit, it's not
fluff.
They're not unreasonable, and it's not fluff. They're all good things, but it's everybody every one of us who manages our own budget, we have to make choices. So the 8.2 million reduction is our first cut, our first round of, based on, we've met with all the department directors, we've spent some time together in the budget office. That's where we are today. It, of course, needs more refinement, but getting feedback from you today will help us as we continue to refine.
I'd love to have some more discussions, but for now, that would be my feedback.
Great.
Okay, I see Commissioner Dora, then Commissioner Herb. We can continue this at 1:30.
Let's continue it.
We can just get, and you have how much more, Ms. Brown?
I had a couple of other things, but I can meet with you individually on the reserve policy. Let's stick with the fund balance, but I would like to invite Dan O'Keefe to just make some comments. I'm not sure he's going to be able to come back after the lunchtime, just to make, because we had a...
I'll recognize Mr. O'Keefe
Thank
before we go. But no, I don't think we can discuss the reserve. You're talking about the fund balance now, and I think everybody needs to understand there's two different things here. So when I've heard the word reserve a number of times. This is fund balance, and there is a different policy on reserve, and we'll talk about that after lunch, and we'll start with you, and I'm sorry about that, Terry, but we're going to start with you, and then, because we've got a full afternoon, so let's not rush through this, and I know, as Commissioner Lockhart said, you're between lunch and go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I don't get lunch today, so that's...
Oh, you're bringing in lunch? Is that what you said?
I'm going right to another meeting. But anyhow, a great discussion. I think it's very, very worthy that you guys are having this discussion. I think it's excellent. You've heard me come up here and say many, many times that when I look at your fund balance, I've always said it's very, very strong. If you go back to the financial crisis back in 08, 09, and you were way up there in terms of your reserves, well, your reserves got cut in half. I mean, had you not had those reserves, you would have been in dire straits. I've also said that there's kind of two primary components when you're talking about fund balance and reserves. One is cash flow, and there's an obvious reason for that because based on the way property taxes are levied. So, the tax bills go out first thing November 1st. You don't really start getting the collections until, late November, early December. So having a 2-month reserve, which is about 17%, makes absolute sense. On the other side is you're in an environment that is very risky because of hurricanes. Now, the good news here, you're a very unique county in that you have a backdrop, and your backdrop is your solid waste fund. If you go back to 2004, when the asterisk hit, Central Florida, those funds were very, very useful in cash flowing, all the debris and all the other costs that you have associated with it because we know that FEMA pays so fast. And you had to have that cash handy in order to get those costs, paid for. So, and even when you're talking to your rating agencies, I would brag about that a little bit and point out that, oh, by the way, we have over $20 million sitting over here that if something really happened to the county, we could tap into those if we had to. So it's one of the strengths of this county that you don't see unless you really know it. Okay, so I think, having a minimum policy makes absolute sense. But in terms of your budgetary process, in terms of how you run and manage your county kind of going forward, you can't have enough fund balance, in my opinion. I mean, you can't. We've seen these economic issues slide in that are crazy. I mean, how many have lived through a pandemic? I mean, how many have lived through, yeah, now you have, all right? Have. I mean, it's, I don't talk about my age anymore. Recessions happen about every 7 years. I just say I'm 9 recessions years old. And, but because we know they're going to happen, and we don't know how deep they're going to go, but that's why you want to have a strong fund balance.
As a CPA, he would talk like that, Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. Does anybody have any quick questions for Dan? Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Ms. Bailey Brown, thank you very much. We're going to finish this conversation in the afternoon. Unless there is an objection, I've already checked, we can do this. I am going to say we're going to come back at 1:45. Okay, we'll start at 1:45, giving us a solid hour for lunch, a solid hour and a little bit more for lunch and everything else. Does anybody have any objection to that?
None.
Then we will postpone, we will adjourn, not adjourn, but, we will come back.
Recess.
Recess. Thank you.